Let me set the scene. The year is 1998, and the Euro is created. I was of the age of 14, sitting on my parents' desktop PC, using god-awful dial-up internet to research the history of William the Conqueror's harrying of the North, when my friend, who for the purposes of this story shall be called Jake, messaged me on IRC. "Hey, some dude at school told me something really cool you can do on your PC." "What?" I asked. 1. Open up Start. 2. Go to Run. 3. Enter 2ndrely2.frt. 4. Tell me when you're done. I did what he told me. What opened up looked like some type of command prompt. It had 2 boxes that text should be entered into, and a regular command line. "Done," I informed him. "In the box, write your name. In the second, write a password. And in the other bit, write rtileoh.us. I did exactly what I was told, and a box telling me to enter a nickname popped up. I wrote Tom Elton. The window closed. A few moments later, a batch file opened that said, "Welcome to the Artile, Ohio chat room. User Tom Elton has joined." I spent the next few months talking to my friends on that chat room. I had no idea who created it or hosted it. It seemed to only work in the Artile, Ohio area, meaning I could talk to anyone there in theory. The only people who were there was me, Jake, and a couple of other people I was friends with. Someone from the preparatory school across town, and once, somebody who claimed to work for the insurance company's tech support, who left after the only response he got was, "What school you at?" I don't know why we used this instead of a normal chat room. Maybe the whole secret gathering aspect of it made us more drawn to it. I don't know for sure. I woke up one fall morning and checked the chat room and found out that I had been promoted to an administrator. I had no idea who did it, but I got to brag to my friends for the next few days and change what people were typing to make them look dumb. But other than that, my powers went unused, until one day, I logged on to see that the anonymous messages to admins was not empty for a change. I wish I didn't check to see what was there. It was a full story from a user called 09HDI7RF, written in multiple single-sentence messages. They described how they were being physically abused by their parents, how they weren't allowed to go outside the house, and how she snuck into her dad's computer and saw this chat room open, and decided to tell anybody she could. I responded with, "Who is this? Also, if this was real, you would have called the cops." Later that day, the chat room stopped working. I couldn't get it to work at all. I got an error message every time I searched the command on my PC's run feature. I was royally pissed off with the fact that me and my friend's secret hidey hole was now dead. 2 days later, what do I see in the news? Girl shot dead by her father after breaking out of her home through a window. The mother was in police custody, but the father was never caught. The family's PC contains documents describing kids named Jake, Tom, and others, describing what he imagined their appearance to be, and what he would do to them if he ever found them, which was too horrific to describe here. That man was never caught, to my knowledge. He is still on the run today, hiding amongst everyone. I'm certain that he will never be caught.
Tracy Blair was the oldest of 3 born to Tony and Kirk Blair. By all accounts, the girl was a happy and friendly child, as was her home life. The fast-growing family had just recently moved to a larger and more modern home across town, and Tracy was said to be somewhat saddened by the move and feared she would lose all friends she'd made. However, once it became apparent most would stay in contact, her attitude would change for the better. Although she was able to keep most of her older friends, she didn't hesitate to make new ones online. Her experience with the internet had just begun, and many of the hazards that went along with it would need to be learned quickly. Despite her innate suspicion of strangers, the girl was still young and trusting of those around her age. Unfortunately, an unknown man with evil intent would use this trust to his advantage. On a foggy morning in 2015, Tracy would disappear from her home, never to be seen again. From what is known, she had recently been in contact with someone posing as her 18-year-old boyfriend. They had been chatting back and forth in Japanese animation chat rooms, and The boy was doing his utmost to get Tracy to meet him. The chat logs show that she was very reluctant to do so. Multiple times she tried to express upon him the seriousness of the situation, especially as to her age. Tracy was barely 14 at the time and well aware of the legalities surrounding any relationship they may have. The young girl seemed to be more interested in making friends rather than anything more intimate, but he didn't appear to be catching on to her signals. By November, his many months of badgering had finally paid off. Tracy agreed to meet with him early that morning prior to leaving for school. She believed her parents would be none the wiser, and she turned out to be right. The young girl obviously had no idea what laid ahead of her. Everything she held dear, except her cell phone, was left behind, so any talk of her running away could be discounted. Thousands of hours of police work have gone into the investigation, and despite having a long trail of chat logs between her and the unknown boy, the computer forensics team are still no closer to tracing his name or location. The team doubts many 18-year-olds would have the extensive computer knowledge this individual appears to have, and are going with the assumption it was an older male. This theory is supported by a similar case in which an unknown middle-aged man had been posing as a teenage male. This man had also convinced another teenage girl to meet with him. On the day of the meet, he had attempted to abduct the girl, but a family picnicking nearby heard the girl's screams and drove the man away. The man was able to escape and is still at large as of the time of this writing. The similarities between the two cases have convinced authorities that Tracy was likely the victim of this same perpetrator. How many other young females have fallen for this ruse is unknown. However, what can be almost positive of is that he, or those like him, may be online attempting to gain the trust of another child this very minute. So I please ask all of you to educate your children on the dangers of the web and monitor their contact online. They also want it to be known that they are still working diligently on Tracy's case and hope she will be found safe very soon. In the meantime, the safety of your own children should be foremost in your mind. If you have any information about Tracy's disappearance, detectives ask you to contact your local law enforcement officials. Came off Star is typing.
Is anyone else bored? I don't want to play Gmod anymore, and I don't want to play 4 more hours of Battlefield 1.
JRED13 is typing.
Nah, man. I'm having fun. It's just you.
LMI Legend is typing.
Yeah, I'm bored too. Let's go do some other shit. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It was 4 a.m., and I had school tomorrow. My friends finally convinced me to pull an all-night gaming marathon. I sighed, knowing that I would regret this in the morning, and finally forced myself to open my eyes. We gotta pass the time somehow. We got like 2.5 hours left until school. What do you guys suggest? Hey, how about World of Tanks? I thought about it for a second, but World of Tanks was really not my type of game. If anything, I wanted to play some Rainbow Six Siege, but nobody else in my group liked it. They thought it was really slow-paced and wasn't a lot of fun. Yeah, no, f*** World of Tanks. Too gritty anyways, and not fun enough to grind for good tanks. Yeah, man, I guess I can agree with that. Hey, can we start a group call or something? I'm sick of typing. Hell no. My ears hurt from wearing this headset for 8 hours, and I don't want to hear you guys talking into it. I just want to play. Sound off, KK?
Martin has joined this room.
Who the f*** is Martin? I got no clue. Who invited him? Yeah, not me. Hey, Martin, who the f*** are you?
Martin is typing.
Hello, friend.
Alright, which one of you guys is using an alternate account? I'm not prone to spooks. Good effort, though. Hey man, I'm not doing it. Yeah, same here. Kick him maybe? Yeah, I got it. I place my hand on the mouse and click on Martin's name. What came up was a profile with no name, bio, and a solid black profile picture. Scrolling down, I discovered that the account had only been made a few days before. Okay, seriously, who the f*** is doing it? The account was made like a few days ago. It's not me, man. Hey, just kick him already, and let's go play something. Alright. I'm really curious to see which one of you guys did it. I right-clicked on Martin and multiple options came up. I clicked on kick, and clicked out of the menu. Okay, he should be gone now. It was probably Legend though, man.
Martin is typing.
Seriously, it's one of you. And if you don't tell me, I'll kick you. I promise.
Group call started.
I nearly fell out of my chair, not realizing that my speakers were actually not muted. The sudden ring caught me off guard. I quickly hit mute on the speakers and turned back to the screen.
Martin, LMI Legend, plus one other person are calling.
I was starting to worry. This was just too bizarre to ignore. I tried kicking Martin again, but it didn't work. Confused, I looked at the call pop-up. Whoever this was, I decided that I should at least play along for now. I moved the mouse over to the green pickup call button and clicked. The text to the chat room was replaced by the call screen, showing the profile picture of my two friends, along with the solid black profile picture that this Martin guy had. I quickly plugged in my headphones and put them on. Breathing. The sound of someone breathing into their microphone was what I was greeted with. When I put on my headphones, it was extremely loud, like the person had the microphone right up to their mouth. The microphone clearly did not have a pop filter, as the breathing came out loud and distorted. I quickly turned down my volume, as the breathing was beginning to hurt my head. In the background, I heard both of my friends talking, but I simply could not make out what they were saying. After a little while, both of my friends hung up. Putting my hand on the mouse, I began moving it towards the red hang up button, but I was interrupted by a sudden change on my screen. The solid black square of a profile picture was replaced with a loading icon. This Martin person was turning on their camera. Now here's something that you need to know about me. Whenever I see something on the internet that I simply doubt, I will ask questions. If somebody shows me a supposedly haunted video, I usually just end up laughing and counter it with simple logic. However, what I saw was something completely different. It was not a hoax. What I saw was real. The loading icon disappeared and was replaced with an image. Black. That was the first thing I saw. Then, I saw a slight movement. As I examined the darkness more and more, I realized that I was seeing somebody walking. At first, I wasn't sure where, but then I saw grass. It wasn't very visible, but I saw it. Suddenly, the darkness was replaced by a bright light. The person walking had just turned on a flashlight. I looked closely and saw grass, as well as a tree in the distance. The person then turned around, and my blood ran cold with terror. I realized exactly where the man was. When he turned around, he pointed the camera at a house. It was pitch black, except for a single bright and slightly yellow glow coming from the second floor window. Right next to the man was my father's grill, with folding chairs placed around it. To the far right of the house, I saw the small garden shed that we had, specifically used for storing tools. The man was standing in my backyard. I leapt out of my chair and ran downstairs to make sure both the front and back doors were locked. Realizing that they were, I ran back upstairs and looked at my screen. Scrolled down past the countless messages of my friends, asking me if I was okay, or if I was asleep, to see a single message from Martin.
I go in now.
I looked to the single window in my room, overlooking the backyard. My backyard was mostly empty, with almost nothing but a tree in the middle. On the tree stood a man, a very tall yet thin man. This man was wearing almost nothing, other than some tore-up jeans and a shirt. He must have triggered the motion sensor garden lights, as the whole garden was now lit up. I could see almost every detail, and what I saw terrified me. The man was crouching on a branch, with a crazed spark in his eyes. His mouth was now stretched into a wide, insane grin, and I could see his horrible rotten yellow teeth. In his hand, He held a mobile phone and a flashlight. Suddenly he tossed the flashlight and his phone to the side. He leapt down off the tree and towards the back door of the house. I heard loud banging noises and what sounded like wailing coming from downstairs. My parents burst through my door, asking me what the hell was going on. My younger brother stood by their side, grasping at my father's leg. I didn't know what to say, so I just told them that there was a man downstairs trying to get in. They rushed downstairs and told me to lock my brother in the upstairs bathroom. Holding my brother's hand, we walked together towards the bathroom, closing and locking the door. I sprinted downstairs towards the back door and almost vomited. The insane man was dragging the body of my father along the ground. I screamed and locked the back door, only to see the insane man dash towards the door through the door's window. Stumbling back in fear, I ran to the upstairs bathroom and asked my brother to unlock the door. He complied, and I rushed in, locking it behind me. I have been sitting in this damned bathroom for hours, with nothing but my brother and my laptop. My little brother keeps telling me that he's hungry. I don't know if I can take much more of this, but starving to death seems better than confronting that monster. My laptop is almost dead now, and I don't know what to do. A few hours back, I heard the sound of a window sliding open, and for the last hour I've been hearing this insane babbling, as well as the sound of footsteps, and it sounds as if this thing is running all over the house, looking for us. The worst part is 5 minutes ago it all stopped. I no longer heard footsteps or the insane babbling. The banging is gone as well. The worst part is that deep down, I want those sounds to come back, because anything is better than listening to this thing sit patiently outside my door, breathing and scratching at the handle. The story I wish to share with you today isn't your typical story that you will hear on this channel. Stories on this channel often regale us with situations of stalkers and other horrors, of how the victims in these stories nearly made it out alive. What we never hear, though, is the stalker's side of the story. If you were to pin an element of horror to my story, it would be that of a ruined reputation caused by exaggerated harms from a supposed victim. Being falsely accused of something should scare anybody, but we never stop to consider that there are two sides to every situation. Now, don't get me wrong. I think stalking is wrong. I think every person has the right to feel safe and unannoyed. I also feel that if a person is accused of something, they have a right to defend his or her actions. You may think, why don't you just get a lawyer and fight it? Well, it's just not that simple. Lawyers are expensive, public defenders are overworked, and also, many states have broad stalking laws, where even if you send somebody polite messages, they can interpret that as stalking. My nightmare begins in 2019. As a little preface, I have a very visible disability. Meeting women is hard for me. Despite my challenges, I still put myself out there, and I try to talk with people online and in person. I can't quite tell you how I came across her, but this girl, whom I will call Brooke, was on my people that I may know list on Instagram. Although I didn't know her, I wanted to. I sent her some polite messages, and she emailed me back, and thus we began our friendship. Soon our messages evolved into texting. She would tell me things about her, and I would tell her things about me. I honestly thought that we would start dating at some point, and this would be my first real relationship. Out of nowhere, she dropped a bombshell on me that she was starting to see another guy. I was crushed. I couldn't believe it, but I remained cool, and I figured that being her friend was the next best thing. As time went on, her boyfriend became very hostile towards me, and they even broke up a few times. It was a mess. One day, through our messages, She relayed to me her struggles with mental health. She asked me if I ever thought of dying, and also told me about her past history with drug abuse. She also said that she kept having nightmares of an invisible man chasing her. I was honestly pretty spooked, but since I've dealt with issues of my own, I wasn't going to abandon her. I would be a hypocrite if I did that. We soon set in motion a plan of meeting up for her birthday. That's how close we were. But just like every good thing in life, it must come to an end. Nothing lasts forever. Brooke texted me one day and said very matter-of-factly, "The Holy Ghost doesn't give me good feelings about you." I was confused. Any normal person would have just ended it there, as that text would probably be a major red flag to anyone. But I have to admit that I was desperate. My pleas of trying to work it out with her didn't sway her, and she proceeded to block me. I am ashamed to admit it, but I have mental problems of my own, and I guess her blocking me caused me to have a breakdown. I tried emailing her, explaining how hurt I was, but she didn't reply. I was devastated. I would stay up at night hoping that she would respond, but she never did. I know at this point in the story I probably sound like an obsessed loser, but I still feel that my actions were not that of a stalker, because I never threatened her, nor did I do anything that would cause fear. I was simply trying to work out a problem. Isn't that what people who are in friendships are supposed to do? Also, with my disability, making connections is hard, so I was trying my best to hold on to what I felt was a valuable connection in my life, and she never explicitly told me to stop. Now, I must be clear, I wasn't messaging her every day. At most, I messaged her every other week. Suddenly, after 3 months, Brooke finally said something. Instead of telling me what happened or what was wrong, she flatly said to stop. I was so confused. All I wanted was an explanation. I wanted to know where things went wrong. After a few polite messages of questioning her, trying to uncover some answers, I finally got the hint, and I left her alone. I sat by myself and pondered the future. It was time for me to move on. I had gotten the response I wanted, and she told me to stop, and I had to respect that. Unfortunately, that's not how things played out. Before I knew it, I had officers at my doorstep serving me with a criminal summons for the misdemeanor of stalking. I was absolutely floored. Sending messages, trying to work something out, is now cyber stalking? I couldn't believe it. I immediately got an attorney and scoured through all of my email communications to her and gave them to my lawyer. He looked over the evidence and couldn't believe that I was being charged with stalking. In the months that followed, hearings were held over Zoom. Brooke gave a brief testimony and twisted the events of what actually happened. I tried sharing my version of events, but the judge simply would not listen. Every day felt like a haze. I had never been in trouble in my life before. Trolls that harassed me online began to spread the rumor that I was a stalker. They would send me emails and taunt me for my current predicament. I was the one being harassed. Slowly my confidence died. I didn't know if I would ever be able to talk to anyone again, if I would even say hi to another girl. Would she turn around and lie and say that I was stalking her too? The prosecutor briefly considered dropping the charge, but was informed that I partake in vices that are legal in another state, and that changed his mind. He claimed that partaking in that recreation, even if it was legal, gave him an insight into my character. This nightmare just kept getting worse and worse. Now my personal life was being used against me. What was he going to do next? Use my eating habits against me too? As the situation spiraled out of control, I had to make a hard choice, and I ended up pleading guilty to the misdemeanor charge. People automatically think that if someone pleads guilty, then they really must be. I think people who have that perspective have never actually been in a situation like I was. When you're up against the state, it's really hard to do anything other than plead guilty. They essentially have you in a chokehold and place your feet against the fire. I felt dirty pleading guilty because I knew I was innocent, but I felt that it was the only way that I would ever be able to move on with my life. 2 years have passed since this incident. I know that throughout the story it may seem like I was deflecting blame. I 100% admit that I was annoying at most, but I disagree that my actions were criminal though. Just imagine if we charged every single person on Facebook who messaged another person multiple times or did other annoying conduct. Our jails would be overbooked, more so than they already are now. I'm not going to share where this took place, but I will say that it took place in a city whose population is about 100,000. They have a large roster of people being charged. I think they do this on purpose and make it a game of ruining people's lives because the police and city attorneys have quotas they have to meet. As I said at the beginning, this wasn't your typical story. This story is scary in another way. Any one of us could be charged at any moment, and our lives turned upside down, and our reputations ruined forever, all based on lies. Never once did a police officer or city official reach out to me and ask for my side of the story. They decided just to charge me because they didn't like me. It's absolutely frightening to think about how many people are in prison for alleged crimes based on exaggerated claims. Next time you hear a story of someone being accused of something, I strongly advise you to stop and perhaps consider their side of the story as well, before you start judging them.
For almost a few years now, end of August 2019 to be exact, I had moved into an apartment in a different city because my mother, who I lived with in my hometown, passed away from cancer. I have moved here with my long-term boyfriend and one other roommate. We all absolutely love it here. The location is great. It's a 15-minute bike ride from my university, and it's located at a square with a grocery store, drugstore, lunchrooms, and that kind of thing. So we have pretty much everything we could possibly need to survive within walking distance. However, after just a month or two of living here, someone has started to ring my doorbell at exactly 11:05 p.m. semi-regularly. Sometimes every day, sometimes every other day. Sometimes there's a week in between, and sometimes there's a couple of weeks in between. But it is always around 11:05 p.m., and every single time, I get no answer each time I ask through the intercom who it is. Except for one time, but I will get to that in a bit. At first, I thought it was friends from one of the neighbors who accidentally rang the wrong doorbell, but after around the fourth time, I grew suspicious, and after more than those 4 times, I started noticing that it always happens at either exactly 11:05 p.m. or a couple minutes earlier or later. My boyfriend and my roommate both work at bars, so they work until very late and would usually only get home around 2 a.m. So each time it happened, I was always alone at home. It started to really freak me out after a while. When I first told them about it, they kinda shrugged it off and said it was probably a wrong dial, much like I thought at first. But when I told them that it has happened so many times, and sometimes even daily, they didn't really believe me and that I was just being paranoid and spooked. However, one night, when the doorbell rang again, I answered the intercom asking who it was. I heard heavy breathing. I was thoroughly spooked at that moment. I was again home alone and kept asking who they were and what they wanted. I couldn't make up from the breathing if it was a man or a woman, but I heard a strange mumbling or whispering, and then it was dead silent. They had appeared to have left. I put my apartment door on a double lock after that. I was so scared and spooked out. Thankfully, my roommate got home a little earlier that night, around 30 minutes after the doorbell rang. He could tell how upset I was. Now with the whole pandemic crisis, my roommate and boyfriend aren't able to work anymore. They now also witness the frequent door ringing at 11:05 p.m., so now they do believe me and agree that it's very odd and creepy. We have a balcony that looks down at where our apartment building's main front door is, but because there's a shop underneath us that always has the awning out, the view to the door is partially obscured. Every time our doorbell rang, me, my boyfriend, and roommate would go over to the balcony to see if we could see anyone, but we never could. I've also asked my neighbors from my apartment building if their doorbell gets rang so often, but the ones that I asked all said it's never happened to them. So a few weeks ago, my roommate decided to do some investigating. He went outside our apartment building at 11 p.m., standing across the street. He pretended to have a smoke while keeping an eye on the door. He said he did see a man who looked kind of suspicious wandering around our apartment building. He slowed his pace down significantly as soon as he approached our door, but when he spotted my roommate looking at him, he quickly walked away. We aren't completely sure if that's the door ringer, but that was very, very suspicious. Our doorbell hasn't gone off at night since that day. I'm hoping that maybe it will stop now, but there is a possibility that it will continue again in a few weeks.
Two years ago, I was driving home late from work on Halloween of all nights. I've been stuck in the office way later than usual, working the tight end of a project with a guy who had a job lined up elsewhere and had otherwise totally checked out. I was angry. The least he could do was be professional about it, and if he was mad at the firm, why take it out on me? Anyway, it's like 8 p.m., I'm starving, and admittedly, I'm doing about 50 in a 30. Then out of nowhere, this little trick-or-treater steps out in front of my car, then freezes, legitimately like a deer in headlights, and just stares at me as I slam on the brakes. I was so sure I was about to hit her. And I know this is low, but I covered my eyes with my hands because I just couldn't bear to see this little kid get smashed. But then, by the time I stopped, I opened my eyes to see she's still standing there. She looks terrified, and you can hardly blame her. So, I open my car door, step out just enough to talk to her, and ask her if she's okay. She just sort of blinks at me, and I assume she's just in shock, so I ask again. But yet again, she doesn't answer. She just sort of looks at me and doesn't say a word. Then, right as I'm about to ask her where her mom and dad are, this big black van, the kind with the sliding door, appears out of nowhere and skids to a stop next to her. The middle door slides open and a man gets out, and I think this might be the kid's family or something, but the way the guy grabbed her, the way the girl screamed when the strange man picked her up, it gave me the distinct impression that whatever just happened was far from wholesome. I found somewhere to pull over, took out my cell phone, and immediately called the cops. I told them everything, what the girl looked like, what her costume looked like, the make and model of the van, along with as much of the license plate as I could remember. I sat there in my car, eyes closed, and tried to picture everything I saw in intimate detail. I assumed I'd be seeing something about it on the news. I mean, whenever a kid goes missing, and especially a violent abduction or whatever, it's normally all over the news, right? Not this time. I didn't see a single mention of it anywhere. I tried searching online too, and I didn't find a single report about black vans or child abductions anywhere around Kansas City. It makes me think I misunderstood what I saw. Makes me doubt myself. Maybe the kid was just, I don't know, disabled in some way and gotten lost while trick-or-treating. There's 100 different ways to rationalize it, but every time I remember the way the guy grabbed her and the way that kid screamed, I don't know. I think I witnessed something terrible, and whoever's responsible had gotten away with it completely. When I was 11 years old, I took my little sister trick-or-treating in our neighborhood. Long story short, there was a lot of trouble back home between my mom, my dad, and my stepdad, this guy called Craig. Craig was a jerk. My mom was a drunk, and Dad was fighting for custody of us. As you can imagine, it was incredibly stressful, and it definitely accounts for one of the most miserable times in my life. But that night's trick-or-treating ended with an absolute low point that I feel very lucky to have escaped. So I took my sister around the neighborhood and we did okay in terms of our candy haul. Then by curfew time, I walked her back to our house, where we found Craig was waiting for us. He looked livid, but we weren't late coming back or anything, so as my sister walked back into the house, I gave her my bag of candy while Craig walked off toward the garage. I kept asking him what was going on, but he wouldn't say anything to me, and as he handed me some gloves, a shovel, and a trash bag, it felt a whole lot like I was being punished for something I didn't do. Then, as I followed him into the woods behind his house, I saw that he had a little hatchet in his hand. The last time I saw anyone with these items in tow, it was some neighbors going to butcher a deer that had been caught on their property. Poor thing had almost disemboweled itself on some razor wire and bled out during the night, and our neighbors must have had a heck of a time getting rid of it. So, as much as I'm kind of nervous about what's going to greet me at the end of our little walk, I couldn't have any idea how horrible it truly was. After about 10 to 15 minutes of walking, Craig tells me to stop and start digging a hole where I'm stood. I ask why, and he tells me to shut up and do as I'm told, which wasn't out of the ordinary, but after only a few scoops of dirt, he stops me. He asks if I want to know why I'm digging, and of course I told him yes, and he tells me that I'm actually digging my own grave. I thought it might have been a Halloween prank or something. One in bad taste, sure, but a prank nonetheless. Then he starts telling me about how my dad has a custody hearing coming up in 2 weeks and that it's my job to make sure that he doesn't win. If he did win, the hole I was in the middle of digging would become my grave. I was 11, dude. 11 years old. And this grown man is telling me how I need to, stop some entire legal proceeding or whatever. That, or he'd kill me, presumably with the hatchet he had in his hand. After that, we picked up all the stuff we'd brought out with us, then walked back to the house. All these years later, parts of me wonder why I didn't react more viscerally to actually being threatened with murder. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just sort of accepted it. I imagine this is what my therapist calls my childhood traumas, and that I was just so burned out with the abuse and fear and the misery that I just took it in my stride. But I'm sure you'll all be pleased to hear that my dad ended up winning custody purely on the basis of him not having any kind of criminal record, while my mom's and Craig's rap sheet was like a mile long. Craig wasn't so smart either, as when the judge ruled in my dad's favor, me and my sister went right home with him. We never saw Craig again, and since my mom refuses to leave him, I haven't actually seen my mom since the hearing. We've talked on the phone a bunch, but I've no desire to see her in person. Not if Craig is still around. I grew up in a place called Fells Point in Baltimore. It's like an old Polish neighborhood, mostly low to middle income housing, but it's about a 15 to 20 minute walk away from Mount Vernon and the Arts District, which is where some of the nicest neighborhoods in the city are. Back when we were kids, I'm talking maybe 9 to 13 years old, our parents wouldn't let us trick-or-treat anywhere too far away from Fells Point or Little Italy. But first year of high school, right when we're on the cusp of being too old to even trick-or-treat in the first place, our parents tell us we're allowed to go out unsupervised and with a later curfew. By us, I mean my friend Nick and my friend George. We know we have to make the most of this newfound freedom, which is when George comes up with a plan that we all thought was a pure masterstroke of genius. Instead of trick-or-treating around some broke neighborhood, we could walk over to Mount Vernon and farm all the rich people candy instead. I mean, in actual fact, we found the nicer neighborhoods to be even less down with Halloween than friggin' Greektown, but at the time, we got it into our dumb heads that we'd be getting full-size candy bars, whole bags of loose candies, dumb ideas like that. So, we got into our costumes, then met up on the corner before heading over to Mount Vernon. But before we left, Nick stops us, puts on some cartoonishly spooky voice and says something like, "May the dark Lord Satan bless our journey, brothers." George, whose parents were hardcore Greek Orthodox and brought him up the same way, starts trying to give Nick a stinger, telling him to stop invoking the name of Satan and stuff. We just started laughing, and he always thought that Christian stuff made him look righteous, when in reality it just gave away that he was a total mama's boy. Anyway, the more George is getting mad at all the Satan stuff, the more Nick is doing it, and almost every time we got candy around Mount Vernon, Nick would wait until the person had shut their door before being like, "Hail Satan, brothers, the Dark Lord provides." It was super funny, and seeing George almost burst a blood vessel every time he said it was even funnier. So we're just walking the streets of Mount Vernon, running out of doorbells to ring, lots of art galleries and other stuff eating up whole blocks there, when we have an idea. The whole time, we hadn't been walking past anything that even resembled an apartment building. We'd have to buzz someone to let us in, and hope the person whose buzzer we pushed had some Halloween spirit about them. You get it. It wasn't an ideal trick-or-treat setup. But given we were running out of real estate and we were still entertaining this idea of there being these stashes of super candy or whatever, we decided to roll the dice on it. We walk down the path of one while we're studying the windows to see if anyone has any Halloween decorations on show. Nick just walks up to the little push pad thing and just mashes all the buttons. Lo and behold, a few seconds later the door to the apartment buzzes and audibly unlocks. "Somebody's always expecting somebody," I remember Nick saying. I know we got that from a movie, I just can't remember which one. Anyway, once we get inside the building, we start knocking on apartment doors, getting told to buzz off by most people, and by the third floor, we're getting pretty tired of walking up each flight of stairs. That's when George has the bright idea of catching the elevator up to the top floor, then working our way down. Trust the fat kid to come up with that one, necessity being the mother of invention and all that. So, we get in the elevator, which was a little sketchy, but otherwise okay looking, and hitched a ride to the top floor. This place only had like 8 or 9 floors. We're lazy, sue us, so it was a very brief ride to the top of the building. But for the 30 seconds or so that we're in the elevator, Nick is putting on this deep voice, rolling his eyes, holding his hands out in front of him like a wizard or something and being like, "Hail Satan, may his candy gifts be bountiful." George just loses it, punches him in the arm and starts yelling at him about how we shouldn't be messing with things like that. The elevator reaches the 9th floor. Nick says, whatever, then goes to step out. But George grabs him by the arm, pulls him back, and starts shouting at him. And I swear to God, about if he keeps talking about Satan, and right when he says Satan, the freaking elevator just dropped into free fall for like a split second before stopping again. It was enough of a drop that maybe only like half of the opening was still visible, but my God, did we freak out. Scrambling out through the opening that remained, each assuming it'd be us the elevator dropped on. We all got out okay and the elevator didn't drop anymore, but we were just out of our minds, man. People were coming out of their apartments to see what all the fuss was about and then asking who let us in. It was a whole thing. Then one of the residents made a comment about calling the cops to have us taken home. We all just made a break for the stairwell. Like it probably would have been a good idea to get a ride home, but we were just so on edge after the whole elevator thing that we just bailed as soon as anyone mentioned 911. After that, we all went our separate ways and dealt with the trauma alone for the night. I want to make it clear at this point that I totally understand what happened was nothing more than a total fluke. Yeah, it was really freaking scary, but I don't think anything supernatural was at play. It doesn't matter if it was Halloween, and it doesn't matter that Nick was hailing Satan all night. But that's not what George thinks. No siree. I mean, some of you might have been able to guess that George saw the whole thing as a huge affirmation of faith, and I wish I could say that he got tired of saying "I told you so," but he didn't. The thing that gets me, though, is how instead of being like, "Don't be a baby, there's no such thing as Satan," Nick seemed to actually believe it. He never came out and said it, and it's not like he started going to church or anything, but he wasn't his usual cocky self whenever the subject came up, and he always just went quiet whenever George suggested he had actually invoked Satan. Couple that with the fact he definitely picked up an interest in spirits and the beyond after the incident, and I don't know. I think Nick really did start believing that Something else was at work that night.
I was 13 years old when this happened on Halloween night in 2015. Since I had been sitting around all day, at 9 p.m. I decided to go for a walk out in the woods. It was one of my favorite things to do, since everything looked so different out in the dark and that there were no people around. I really loved the cool night air and the spooky feeling of the woods and the nearby pond. I'd started walking past my neighbor's blue house when they were having a huge Halloween party. There were flashing lights at the windows and music blaring, and I could hear all the drunk people raving in the yard. But soon enough, I had made it to the quiet woods like I had planned. As I was walking on the forest path, I started to feel very nervous and paranoid. I couldn't really see where I was going, and eventually had to take my earbuds off to be more aware of my surroundings. The feeling of uneasiness started to fade for a moment as I made it through the woods and onto a street near the one I lived on. I turned the corner back to my street, my earbuds back on, and blasting Nightcore, now almost relieved that I was almost home. I started to think I was being stupid for getting so jumpy over nothing, but then a thin figure appeared from behind the still lively blue house, and I immediately tensed back up. As the figure got closer, I placed my house keys between my fingers like I learned from the internet and tried to make out what I was seeing. The figure was a man fairly tall, bald, and wearing a black suit. He was also ghost white, and due to my poor vision, I literally almost shit myself thinking it was Slenderman himself coming to take me. A moment later though, I noticed that he did in fact have a face, and he had painted it to look like a skull. The man was obviously wasted, and he was staggering in a zigzag motion across the empty street right towards me. For a split second, I was hoping he was too hammered to even notice me, but that hope quickly faded as he made his way right to me. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. My house was only 2 houses away, but I'd have to get past this unpredictable man, and I had no idea if I could outrun him with my asthma. Panicking, I was considering other ways to get away from him into safety. Could I turn back and maybe take a long way around to the other end of my street? No. It's dark. There's no one around, and I could definitely not run for that long. Can I make it to my grandma's house? Can't do that either. There's no guarantee that she's awake or even home. As I was trying to decide, my thoughts were interrupted as the man put a hand tightly on my shoulder. He started speaking, but I couldn't hear him properly due to my music still playing in my ears. All I managed to hear was him questioning what girl my age was doing out alone so late at night. I could only stand there and stare. The man then paused, raised his arm, and then pointed a finger to the woods behind the houses and then said something. It was at this point that I decided if I didn't do something, soon my body would definitely end up being found in the woods. I looked at the woods, then at the guy, shook him off, and broke into a full-on sprint past him at my house, crossing some of that blue house's property. At my front door, I was furiously stabbing my key into the old rusting lock with my shaky hands, fearing that any second that man would come grab me from behind and drag me into the dark forest on the other side of my yard. I finally managed to get inside and made sure the door stayed locked before I could finally breathe again. I threw my shoes off and made my way into the basement as my tears started rolling down my face. Sobbing, I had told my older brother what was going on, and together we called our parents who weren't home at the time. They said they would check it out, and we didn't call the police, since it was a little town and no harm was actually done. The next day, my dad had informed me that the drunk man was actually just one of the taxi drivers in our town, and we just never spoke of it again. It's 6 years later, and I still get extremely nervous going outside after dark, even though I don't live anywhere near that place anymore. I've told this story to my friends a few times, and it honestly sort of annoys me that I didn't get as much as an apology from that guy. I really honestly hate the whole town, and the fact that no one there does anything when things like this happen. I'm glad I live in a bigger place now, where we at least have street lights. After listening to a bunch of Halloween horror stories, it reminded me of something that happened to me when I was 15. For some context, I'm a guy, and I was trick-or-treating with 4 of my friends who I'll call J, D, A, and T. We wanted to have some extra fun this time for 2 reasons. One, this was our first time trick-or-treating in what we called our late teens. The second reason was this might have been our last time trick-or-treating because of how busy our life would soon become due to academic reasons. This did turn out to be the case, but not for the reason we thought. We were walking down some random street when we saw a house with insane decorations to the point where we almost thought it wasn't even a house. We walked up to the door, and then before we could even ring the doorbell, some guy opened the door. This alone already put the 5 of us on alert. He then said,
Sorry, we're out.
This honestly relieved us, and then we just walked away, not saying a word. We continued walking down the road, and then turned to walk to Jay's house. As we were walking, Dee had stopped us and then pointed out, Yo, who is that? We turned around and then saw a shadow about 75 feet from behind us. We gave it no thought and just continued walking. We eventually made it to Jay's house about 10 minutes later. His parents weren't home, so we could be as loud as we wanted. We had started playing video games in his room. That is, until we heard a scream. What the hell? We all turned and yelled when we saw the guy from the house at Jay's window, trying to open it. Now, I was in a marching band at my school at the time, but what people didn't know was just how much it developed my legs. I stormed towards the window, opened it with so much force that it would have cracked the wall if I did it any harder, and then I kicked the guy straight in the face. He staggered back, and then I quickly closed the window. This may seem over the top, but I swear it actually happened. We then saw him run away, and we decided to stay the night just to make sure nothing happened to Jay. Why didn't we call the cops? Because we didn't feel like it was necessary that 5 15-year-old guys could easily overpower one old guy with a broken nose. But it's not like it mattered, because we never saw him again after that. And thank God for that.
For a little background information on myself, I work for one of the largest haunted houses in the United States. My family has owned and operated this location for more than 30 years. I'm not going to say exactly where it is, but I will say that most people probably know it. The event I'm about to tell you happened around 2005. For more obvious reasons, October is one of our most busiest months. We often hire people that have worked for the haunted house before, and when we were short-staffed, we will ask the coworkers to see if they have anybody they know that would be interested in working for the season. So this particular Halloween event we had going on, we were desperate for staff, as the town was having a large event, and it brought a crazy amount of traffic through our location, more than usual. Now, back in these days, we didn't really have Craigslist or Indeed to hire people. It was more word of mouth, or we could put an ad out on the newspaper. So with that being said, one day we have a man who was in his early 20s. His name is Joseph, and he appeared to be a drifter. Now, some of you that don't know what a drifter is, it's more or less just someone that's homeless, that likes to travel a lot. Now, this wasn't too uncommon in our town. It was kind of a hot spot for this kind of activity. I gave Joseph a pretty formal interview. I knew that he wouldn't have any documentation, and offered to pay him under the table. Joseph had experience working with special effects and makeup. At least he said he did. So I didn't really question it. I told him what time to start, and I paid him a little bit up front, because he seemed to be a little bit down, and it seemed like the right thing to do. Joseph was going to start Halloween Day, and would be doing the makeup on all the staff. Everybody seemed to be having a good time. Families were coming in, tickets were being sold. In about an hour into the event, I had a couple of regular employees come to me saying that they smelled something that resembled blood, or like that of hard copper smell. If you've ever worked for a butcher or by a slaughter plant, you'll know what I'm talking about. I hadn't really thought about it at this point, but as soon as they mentioned to me, I also smelt it. It was very odory and strong, and as I passed by my employees, it became stronger. I noticed that my employees were covered in fake blood, but as I looked at it, the way it dried on their skin looked all too real. I asked them where they got this fake blood from, and almost simultaneously they said Joseph. Now keep in mind, I'm trying to run this event, and we have close to 40 employees there, as well as close to 100 people walking around. But finally, I come up to Joseph, and I can see his hands covered in the same substance. As I approach him, the smell hits me like a brick wall. Now at this point, I know for a fact that it's actually real blood. I asked Joseph what the hell he thought he was doing, and within seconds the man lost his shit. I mean, he absolutely screamed and yelled like somebody was stabbing him. Up until the point he seemed so calm. Already eyes were starting to look at us from around, and I was trying to calm down the situation to not start a panic. I told Joseph we could talk about the situation in my office. What he did next was something straight out of a horror movie. Joseph goes on to pick up the bucket that he was using, runs right past me and to the others into a large crowd of people, and tosses the bucket all over them. I just stood there with my jaw wide open, not really sure what to say or do. As I was trying to piece together everything that was happening, Joseph got away. I couldn't find him anywhere, all the while trying to comfort everyone, telling them all that it was just a joke. And another employee had called the police by this point. They arrived within a couple of minutes, and I had a lot of questions to answer, but no answers to give. The guy didn't give me any idea, so I couldn't tell him exactly what his real name was. All I knew was that it was Joseph. The only thing I could tell them was a brief description of him. He was tall, lanky. His skin seemed sun-dried and damaged despite his age. He had long black hair and, surprisingly enough, a perfect smile. They never did find out who it was or what his intentions were, nor did we ever find out where the blood came from. And I think it's the scariest part of the whole situation.
I actually had a pretty decent scare back when I was 14, and I'm in my early 20s now, so some of the more intricate details are a little hazy, but I'll try to tell it as accurately as I can remember. So the story happened on Halloween night in 2013. Me and my 3 friends, Dallas, AJ, and Anthony, had all collectively decided that we would meet up at my house to begin trick-or-treating, as my house was located right next to the wealthier neighborhood in the city. Our game plan to maximize our trick-or-treating efficiency was to start off at my house, then work our way down towards the nice neighborhood, and then loop around. Before we began, Anthony mentioned that he had bought some weed, and so we all smoked some in the alleyway by my house before we began. We made our way through my neighborhood, in a decent bit into the nice neighborhood before we decided to start heading back so we could get to the houses on the opposite side of the street as we started making our way towards my house. Unfortunately, it was already pretty late at this point, and so a lot of the houses had already started turning off their lights. By the time we were almost out of the nicer neighborhood, just about every house had turned their lights off, except for this one that was attached to a bunch of other townhouses. We, being the desperate, candy-starved teenagers that we were, weren't going to let the late hour of the night sway us from our potential earnings. So we all made our way up onto the porch and rang the doorbell. We waited for a decent bit, probably a good 30 seconds, before we finally heard some loud thumping behind the door. It was an older male, probably in his early 40s. He answers the door in a stained tank top and a pair of denim boxers. The guy looked like he hadn't showered or shaved in like a solid week, but he did seem pretty nice though, despite his appearance. And he made some sort of joke about us being the only trick-or-treaters out there, as we had stayed out later than everyone else, and so we deserved a better reward than the rest of them. He told us to wait there just for a moment while he went and got some treats for us. None of us really found his appearance weird, and I partially blame the weed that we'd smoked earlier, as we weren't as paranoid about him as much as we were paranoid that some cops would see us walking down the street and somehow know that we smoked. We heard his thumping footsteps as he walked around his house, and then a couple of minutes later, he then came back with some black DVD boxes. He held them out like a deck of cards, and he told us to take what we wanted. As he said this, he cracked a smile, and I remember thinking about just how gross his yellow jagged teeth were. We looked at the covers, and they were all adult movies, some of them not even featuring females on the cover. AJ made a comment about the movies, saying we just wanted candy, but the guy just smiled wider with his crooked yellow teeth seeming to stick out of his mouth, and then he said,
I know what kids your age like to do. Don't worry. It's okay. You can trust me. I'm cool.
At this point, me and my friends all began awkwardly shuffling away from the porch, politely declining his offer, when the man put his hands on his underwear, then started rubbing himself as he begged us to stay and then come inside so we could watch movies together. He said that he'd let us eat all the candy we want, and other really disturbing things. While he was still going on his tangent, me and my friends all collectively decided to book it towards my house. Pillowcases full of candy awkwardly being shuffled in our arms. We ran out of the nice neighborhood and down this large hill that the nice neighborhood sat on top of, before forking it left onto the city street that would lead to my house. Before we made it out of the nice neighborhood, I remember looking back and seeing the grown man chase after us for the first part, but then giving up shortly after and going back into his house. We eventually made it to my house and went directly into the basement through a set of stairs that was in the back of my house. While we were in there, we all collectively talked about just how insane what happened was, and we wondered if the weed we smoked had made it seem weirder or maybe more normal than it actually was. Either way, we egged his house the next day, and we never went back there for Halloween ever again.
"20-year-old Kelly Berg Dove lived with her 4-year-old daughter in Bridgewater, Virginia. She was a popular young woman. Not a single soul in all of Bridgewater seemed to have a bad word to say about her, least of all her loving husband, who she'd been romantically involved with since they were both high school sophomores. She also made a point of keeping in touch with her mother and sisters almost every single day. All in all, Kelly was about as wholesome as a person as you've ever likely to find, and even found the time to work night shifts at a local gas station to help support her family. They weren't exactly strapped for cash, but Kelly valued the idea of making a contribution that would allow them a taste of the finer things in life, as well as squirreling a little of her paycheck away each month for her daughter's college fund. But sometimes terrible things happen to the most wonderful of people, and on the night of June 18th, 1982, something was about to happen in the sleepy town of Bridgewater that would send shockwaves through the close-knit community. In the night in question, Kelly was working her usual night shift at Harrisonburg's Imperial gas station on South Main Street, Route 11. Kelly had gotten the job because her 3 sisters had either worked there in the past or were still currently employed by Imperial. The employer thought that it would make the girls more accountable for their work, and he was right. Whenever one was sick or couldn't come into work, another would always take her place. And on this night in particular, Kelly was covering for one of her sisters for a little extra college money for her young daughter. Kelly's mom, Rachel, was also a very loving and attentive person, and would often call the gas station whenever one of her daughters was working to check if they needed any food or hot coffee brought over to help them through their shift. When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, nothing seemed to be amiss. To her, it was just another average night at a mostly quiet gas station in rural Virginia. But little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever talk to her daughter, as the evening's events were about to take a rather dark and terrifying turn. At around 2:30 in the morning, long after Kelly's mom had retired to bed, Kelly apparently called the Harrisonburg police. The call was to inform them that she had been aggressively harassed by a guy that she described as improperly dressed. It seems Kelly was far too polite to describe what this male customer actually did in any kind of detail, but it's safe to assume that the implied meaning was that he had exposed himself to her. Just a few minutes after this first call, Kelly called again, this time pleading with the dispatcher for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station. The same man that apparently exposed himself was calling the station to make obscene threats, and it seems that Kelly was growing anxious as she believed he was willing to follow through with them. The dispatcher promised to get a unit out to her as soon as possible, and that she should hang tight. However, just moments after the second call ended, Kelly dialed 911 yet again, only this time she was in a complete panic. With a voice that was dripping with fear, she demanded to know how far away the responding officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford that was parked in the gas station's parking lot. The last thing the 911 dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The cops rushed over to the Imperial gas station, expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. But to their bemusement, when they arrived at the gas station, the place was as quiet as the grave. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained was her purse. There were no signs of any kind of violent struggle, no indications that the store had been robbed, but there were also no clues as to where Kelly was. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. What's clear is that if the suspect was armed, he could have forced Kelly into his vehicle in just a matter of seconds. Kelly's family believed this to be the case, as they insisted that any attempt by an unarmed man to grab her and shove her into their vehicle would have resulted in Kelly fighting back vigorously. The police investigation that followed led officers to a nearby convenience store, where a clerk informed them that he had been visited by a man driving a gray vehicle about a half hour before Kelly's disappearance. The clerk told him that the man was aged between 20 to 25 years old and had blonde, shoulder-length hair. This might seem like an obvious lead, but the cops were unable to track down this man, so no connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction could ever be made. The police then interviewed Kelly's 3 sisters, who were also employed by the gas station. They were shocked to hear that the obscene kind of phone calls that Kelly had received that night were commonplace, but that no one had ever acted on them, believing them to be from some harmless old pervert whose bark was louder than his bite, so to speak. They also didn't entirely believe that the man that had harassed Kelly that night was the same person making the phone calls, as there didn't seem to be anything overly threatening about the lewd calls, while the driver of the silver or gray Ford was obviously aggressive enough to show up to the gas station in person. Yet after news hit that one of the gas station girls had apparently been abducted, the phone calls seemed to stop entirely for a while, only resuming around 6 weeks later when this apparently harmless old perv called and made lewd comments to one of the gas station's new hires. This could well be because whoever was making the calls simply wasn't involved in the abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves as a suspect in such a violent and disturbing crime. But it also could be because the same person who made the calls was satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call, not until the same hunger resurfaced in them around a month and a half after the fact. When local media outlets contacted Kelly's parents regarding their daughter's disappearance, they gave a rather shocking answer to some very probing questions. When asked if they had any idea who might have kidnapped or harmed their daughter, and if this person might be a member of the local community, Kelly's parents unequivocally answered in the affirmative. Although the police had asked them not to publicly speak the man's name, they believed her abductor had been someone Kelly had gone to high school with, someone who had a long history of indecent exposure and making obscene telephone calls, and according to Kelly's sister, also drove a silvery gray Ford. But surely if Kelly had known the man personally, even just by association, she would have named him on one of the 3 911 calls she made leading up to her abduction. But it's also very possible that this person had either obscured their face somehow, or Kelly had simply not recognized him given that they had both graduated some time ago. There's also the possibility that Kelly was so terrified that she just failed to mention the man by name during one of the calls. Either way, the police obviously found the possibility of this man being the culprit so plausible that they asked Kelly's parents not to use his name publicly. Yet despite this, he was never charged with any crime, as there was simply not enough evidence to attempt any kind of conviction. There were several other suspects in the case, and authorities were sure to question all of them. But at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still just technological pipe dreams, actually placing a suspect at the scene that night was all but impossible. For all intents and purposes, the person who showed up at the Imperial gas station that night was a ghost, someone who showed up, bundled Kelly Berg Dove into a vehicle, and then seemingly vanished themselves. Barely a trace of either of them was left behind, merely a purse and a vehicle description, Far too little for the cops to go on to secure a suspect, Kelly, or her body. Almost 40 years later, what happened that night remains almost a total mystery, with Kelly being declared legally deceased by local authorities. Despite her family pouring money into private investigators to try to find out exactly what happened, they're no closer to getting any solid answers as they were almost 4 decades ago. The only truth we have of that night is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night, not suspecting a thing, and ended up encountering someone that caused her to vanish from the face of the earth. And that, horrifyingly enough, is something that could happen to each and every one of us.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
It was the summer of 2015, and I had just gotten my first well-paying job at a gas station. It was one of the more bigger gas stations you'd see about halfway to a destination to stop for food or to use the restroom. While it might have not been the most exciting job in the world, it was definitely one that paid a substantial amount of money. For reference, I'm a female and was 24 years old at the time. I'm pretty short and weigh around 100 pounds. At the time, I didn't have a car, so I had to rely on taking the public bus to get to and from work. Since business was usually pretty slow during the night shift, my manager allowed me to chill out behind the counter if I had nothing to do. Sometimes you'd have your occasional 2 or 3 customers come in at around 1 a.m. for a late night snack, but other than that, the store was mostly dead. Most of the time, I'd be at the front minding my business, scrolling through Instagram and whatnot. It was a chill and great opportunity for me to catch up on my personal needs as well. One night, my manager had asked if I could work late as the guy working after me had suddenly quit and went to go make a living in watchmaking. Apparently, this guy obviously hadn't heard of a 2 weeks notice before, so I was livid to say the least. Whatever, it was extra pay and I couldn't afford to fall behind on rent. With me practically working double shifts at this point, I was running the store for long hours into the night. Some nights I'd have to bring my coffee to help keep me awake as the job could get boring pretty quickly. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going well and I was even able to catch up on my studies. I had worked with my other coworker, Brandon, but we never really exchanged conversation as he mainly worked in the back. There was this one night, however, where something happened that little did I know would completely break me. I was working my usual nightly shift and I was cleaning up the floors after a customer had vomited from drinking too much. Once I clean everything up, I hear the door open and in walks a man with a backpack. He had a white beard and wore a dirty white tank top with cargo pants. I wave at him as a way of saying hello and he then gives me an unsettling grin while looking back at me. I'm from the South, so it wasn't uncommon to see these types of people every now and then. He proceeds to grab a 6-pack of beer from our refrigerator and puts it on the counter, and I say hi once again. So, Ashley, what time are you at here? Right from the start, this guy smelled like straight up weed and I could smell the alcohol in his breath. I nervously chuckle and say, 7. Ah, I see. Do you need a ride? I can take you home. I tell him no thank you and that I already have one and change the subject by telling him his total. He gets out his wallet and proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched. I give him his change and tell him to have a nice night, and he then starts to ask if he could give me a ride home again. I tell him no, and he grabs his beer, giving me a wave before saying, "See you later, Ashley." He walks out the door, and I watch him get into his truck and drive off. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I figured I was out of the woods. A few hours go by, and I finish up the remaining time for my shift before the person working after us comes in. I tell Brandon, who was still in the back, about what had happened, and he offered me a ride home so I wouldn't have to take the bus. Brandon and I walk out into the parking lot, and so far the coast seemed clear with no sign of the man. Long story short, he drives me home, and I go to sleep until the following night. My mom had dropped me off at work, and I go in to see my manager standing there. Upon entering, he immediately comes up to me and says, "Ashley, is everything okay? How did you get home last night?" I told him that Brandon gave me a ride home, and my manager gets this confused look on his face. "Oh, that's weird because some guy came in just before 7. He said he was here to pick you up." A few months ago, I had just started working the graveyard shift at a Target in a big city on the east coast of Massachusetts. For reference, I'm a female and was 17 at the time of this story. I'm pretty short, about 5'6", and weighed about 150 pounds. The store happened to be located in a residential area that wasn't so great or safe. What I mean by that is that there would sometimes be break-ins and shootings once in a while. Let's just say the cops drove by several times a week. Because it wasn't as safe as most areas, there would always be a security guard by the front doors at all times named Chris. He was from Chicago and was a trained boxer, able to take on anyone who may pose a threat. My coworkers and I tried talking with him here and there, but he was mostly quiet and focused on himself. Having him there made me feel a lot more safe, as I have really bad asthma attacks and get frightened really easily. At the time, I didn't have my inhaler or breathing treatment with me, so an asthma attack would result in me going to the hospital. One night at around 8 p.m., I was doing my usual routine of scanning the merchandise in one of the sections of the store. As I'm putting away some shirts where they belong, I notice a man at the end of the aisle. I politely ask if he needed help, and he walks right over to me asking where the men's shoes were. I direct him to section C, and he then says, "You know, you're very beautiful." I smile and say, "Thank you very much," and continue to stock the remaining shirts. The store is pretty much dead at this point, as we don't get a lot of customers at this time of night. He thankfully goes over in the direction of the shoes, and I finish putting away the shirts. One of my coworkers, Hannah, comes over to me and asks me about the guy who I was talking to. I told her I didn't know, and we both go and get ready to clock out as we were getting ready to close. Hannah tells me to go around and check for any more people who still might have been in the store. For the most part, the store is practically empty, but I then found the same man still in section C. I politely tell him that we were closing, and he gives me this weird grin on his face. "Do you need a ride home? We can go back to my place." I tell him no and ask him to please leave the store and that we were closing. However, he doesn't listen and comes up to me and starts to grope me. At this point, I'm starting to panic, realizing what had just taken place, but knew I had to keep my breathing in check. I slowly turn around and walk toward the front entrance, telling Chris about what had just took place. Being the nice and kind-hearted person he was, he confronted him and told him that he wasn't allowed back in the store again. The guy showed no remorse and just stayed quiet while walking out of the store. Because I was still a minor at the time, Chris offered to stay behind until my parents came to get me. When they came, Chris had told them about what had happened and explained that he would inform the manager the next day. I worked at that store for another 3 months and only saw the guy once, staring through the windows. I still don't know what would have happened had Chris not been there that night. When I was about 19 or so, I got my first ever real job working at a gas station during the spring. It wasn't the best paying job, but it was enough to get my foot through the door to start making payments for college and stuff. I lived by myself in a small one-bedroom apartment that my parents paid for, but got the job in the meantime to cover other expenses. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of night shifts knowing I had a 7 a.m. class every morning. It was annoying to say the least, but I really needed the money. During the night shift, you'd have people constantly come in and out for gas, and right around the 10 p.m. mark, business would be slow for the most part. After that, you'd maybe have 1 or 2 shady people come in once an hour for a snack or cigarettes. That being said, it's still a pretty good time where I could chill out for a few hours. One night, I was on my shift as usual and had just finished serving what I thought was the last customer for the night as I was about to end my shift. As I'm packing up and getting ready to leave, a car pulls up right in front of the store and a man gets out. He wore a stained white shirt and had a scruffy beard with messy hair. He walks right in and I greet him with a hello and asked if I could help him with anything. He completely ignores my question and walks over to the refrigerators and grabs a 6-pack of beer. I live in the South, so people like this were very common around here. I tell him his total and he then says something that made my skin crawl. "Hey, you're really pretty. I love your hair." Laughing awkwardly, I tell him thanks and he proceeds to hand me a $10 bill, making sure our hands touched. I give him his change and tell him to have a good rest of his night and go on my phone, hoping he'd get the hint to leave me alone. He thankfully left and I waited for my coworker who was working after me to arrive so I could go home. However, he must have been running late because it was 10 minutes past his shift and I was getting a bit annoyed. 10 minutes turned into 20 and then eventually 30. As I was about to call him to see where he was, I then noticed someone hiding behind one of the gas pumps. It was a little hard to see, but because of the light, I could make it out to be the same man from earlier. I had no idea as to what he was doing, but I could tell that it clearly wasn't good. He then comes out from behind the pump, and I see that he's clearly hiding something behind his back, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I grabbed my keys and was headed out toward my car when I see him approach the front door, giving me this unsettling look. It was a look of hatred and fury. Suddenly he pulls out a gun and proceeds to show it to me as if he wanted me to know that he was armed. At this point, I'm frantically dialing 911 on my phone, and he then shoots the lock and steps inside yelling at me while having me at gunpoint. He orders me to give him all the money in the register or he won't hesitate to pull the trigger. I take a few deep breaths and calmly hand him the money we had, and he then takes off down the road. I call the police while bawling my eyes out in fear, and the operator tells me to stay on the line with her until an officer arrived. Thankfully, the guy never made it too far, as police had managed to track him down. Turns out, this guy was wanted for sexual assault and murder. His victims were 2 family members, one of them being his wife, 1 widower, and 2 gas station employees. Just like me. The next day, I quit my job at that gas station and now work at my local supermarket.
I worked at a museum a couple of years back, maybe a decade ago. I was a night shift security guard. It was as boring as you could imagine, but I desperately needed the money and it paid a few more dollars than any other job I could land, so I figured why not. I remember landing a construction job a year into working this night shift security job. I enjoyed construction a lot more and I desperately needed to get my life back on track. Being on night shift really messed with my mood and general well-being. The construction job I got had roughly the same pay, so it was a no-brainer even if I had to do a little bit more manual labor. As much as I disliked the job itself, I really liked all the people that worked at that museum. They were actually really cool. I went ahead and gave them my 2 weeks' notice and told them that I would stick around for as long as they needed me to find a replacement. They hired some skinny pale guy named Justin. When I first met him, he seemed like he was a decent enough guy. After all, it really wasn't my problem once I left. After a couple of shifts with him, though, I noticed that he was an extremely awkward and very strange person. He did this thing where he would change the tone of his voice mid-sentence. It was really strange and it almost made me feel like he had some kind of mental issue. Trust me, I wasn't being judgmental or anything, and if you heard it yourself, you would probably have had the same concern. Not that I thought that he was dangerous or anything, just a little out there with a possible mental illness, maybe even a speech impediment. But anyway, it was my 3rd or 4th shift training him, and it was an ordinary night just like any other. As weird as he may have been, he seemed somewhat depressed or sad. I caught on pretty easily as he didn't make much of an effort to conceal it. We were making the usual trip throughout the entire museum, which was honestly a pretty long walk. We were probably about 10 minutes into it when I finally just asked him why he seemed so sad. He told me that he was really lonely and couldn't get a girlfriend. Again, if you had one look at this guy, you would probably understand why he couldn't get a girlfriend, let alone his weird personality. I tried telling him that there were plenty of fish in the sea and that he could probably have some luck on the internet. Online dating wasn't as big back then, though. He kind of shrugged his shoulders and just continued being sad. Whatever, I didn't know what else I could tell him. After that point, it became gradually weirder and weirder with each passing night. It was really strange. For instance, he would start going on these massive monologues about the most random things in the world. I only had to stay for a couple more shifts, but it honestly became really intolerable being around this guy. There was one night where he talked for at least 15 entire minutes about the environmental harm of pizza crust. Yes, literally pizza crust. It made absolutely no sense in the world. I tried interrupting him a couple of times to ask what was up, but he just cut me off and even started ignoring me after a certain point. When you are completely alone in a massive building with one other person, trust me when I say that their mental well-being is very important. I gradually began feeling more and more unsafe in the presence of this weird guy. Justin just seemed like he was going crazy or something. Thankfully, my entire shift with him went by decently enough. It was still awkward and moderately unbearable, but it was at least over. I started my new job and everything seemed to be going really well. I had completely forgotten about Justin and life seemed to move on. I didn't really think about that security job anymore at all. That was until I heard about an interesting story from my friend a few months later. I still kept in touch with a few people from the museum that worked there during the day. We were only Facebook friends, but that was enough for me. One of them messaged me to ask me what I thought about that guy Justin that replaced me. I was honest with her and told her that I thought Justin was really strange and possibly insane or something. And she typed back, "You're going to love this then." She then proceeded to tell me about Justin being fired for completely destroying an entire exhibit on night shift. I guess they came in at the morning shift and found him trying to put it back together. They watched the security footage and this guy literally tried to fight a dinosaur skeleton. I guess he had been acting really weird that night, judging by what she had told me about the rest of the security footage. But the interesting part of the story is that they somehow found out he was on antipsychotic medication. They figured that He probably had stopped taking his medication. That was all my friend knew, and that's all I know. It's really scary how people can stop taking their very necessary medication on a whim, and then potentially have a complete mental breakdown. I started wondering if he had been off his meds when I first met him. All I know is that I'm kinda happy I don't ever have to see Justin again.
Working as a driver for DoorDash has been a pretty good side job ever since I moved to Converse, Texas. I mainly pick up deliveries inside of San Antonio, but sometimes I will find ones that take me out of Converse and a bit into the country. Now, I used to not mind those deliveries, and I would pretty much accept any job that I could handle, but after this one incident that brought me to a Texas ranch, I will no longer go outside of the cities of Converse and San Antonio. It was around 8:30 p.m., and I picked up an order that brought me out to the middle of nowhere. That's the crazy thing about Texas. 1 second, you can be in a big city, and the next, there is practically nothing around you for miles. As I drove around looking for the entryway onto this massive property, I began following a large fence that ran alongside the street. I figured the fence would eventually lead me to the entryway, and I was correct. I pulled into a small driveway that led me to a large electric gate with a number pad that required a code to get in. I wasn't given a code, so I decided to contact the person who sent out the order. They responded within a minute with a text that read, "The code, pound 6660. Welcome to the family." I was confused by that last line, but I leaned out of my car window and punched in the code, chuckling to myself at the fact that they used 666 for a code. After a second, the gate made a loud banging sound and then slowly slid open across rust-covered tracks. The gate opened to reveal a long, winding pathway with trees lining both sides of it. They must have been planted there by the owners a while back because they looked oddly out of place compared to the barren fields that surrounded the ranch. I began to make my way down the driveway, and I couldn't help but shake the creepy feeling that was coming over me. I was on edge, which I'm glad for because as I rounded one of the small bends, in the middle of the driveway, my headlights revealed a tall, pale man wearing a dirt-covered black suit. We stared at each other for a moment without either of us moving. I was in shock. Eventually, I got the courage to roll my window down a bit and yell out, "Did you order the takeout?" But he didn't answer. All he did was step to the side and point down the driveway, as if telling me to continue. Reluctantly, I did. I continued down the pathway, and behind every couple of trees, I can't help but think that I see more people dressed up in a similar suit as the man who had been standing in the driveway. Still, I continued on. Finally, I could see a house in front of me, but as if it was something out of my worst nightmare. Standing on the porch of the large house and along the outside of the driveway were at least a dozen or more men, all dressed in dirt-covered suits, some black and some gray. I froze. I didn't know what to do, but I knew for a fact that nothing could make me get out of my car at that moment. After sitting in the driveway, staring at the group of strange men, I noticed that one of them had something in their hand. My eyes widened as I realized what it was, and I quickly threw the car into reverse. One of the men on the porch was carrying a rifle of sort. I wasn't close enough to see what kind it was, but I knew it was a firearm of some sort. I slammed my foot on the gas and began swinging my car around in reverse to turn around so that I could drive out of there as fast as I could. At that point, I noticed a few of the men now begun walking toward my car. After fully turning around, I put my car into drive and began flooring it. I let out a scream as I heard a loud bang followed by my rear windshield shattering. I leaned forward and made my head as low as possible while still being able to see over the dashboard. As I made my way down the driveway, every tree that I passed, I could see a man stepping out from behind it and walking toward the path that I had been driving down. Luckily, None of them seemed to be armed. I made it out of the driveway and onto the road, and as I passed the still open gate, I noticed that it began to close. They were trying to trap me inside with them. I sped down the road and called 911 as I made my way to the police station and explained to them what just happened to me. They were confused when I told them the address because they were familiar with it, and it had apparently been an abandoned property for the past decade. By the time the officers made it to the ranch, however, they said it appeared to still be abandoned and there was no one around. 3 hours after I finally got home, around 2:30 a.m., I received a text message saying, "Where'd you go? It was just getting fun." That was the last time I ever took an order outside of the city. I started working for DoorDash shortly before the pandemic hit, about 2.5 years ago, and at first I loved it. I was fresh out of high school and earning a decent amount of money making deliveries throughout Brooklyn and the surrounding boroughs. The best part of the job was being able to set my own hours, and since I had nothing better to do, I just worked as much as I could and earned as much as I could while it was possible. The only reason I stopped was that I lost my car and couldn't afford to get a new one without getting a different, less mobile job. You see, I was doing my usual routine and waiting for an order to be placed that I could pick up and make a couple of dollars. And when an order finally came through, I was quick to snatch it and begin making my way to the pickup location. It was a pizza place that I was familiar with, so finding parking to pick up the food wasn't an issue at all. And by the time it was ready to be picked up, I was there grabbing it. I made my way back to my car as fast as I could, letting the person who ordered the pizza know that their food was picked up and on the way. I looked at my phone and saw that the delivery was to an apartment building a couple blocks over, and in no time, I was en route with the food. It took me about 6 minutes to get to the block that the apartment building was located on, and luckily for me, street parking wasn't too bad at that time of day, and I managed to find a spot that was right next to the building. Now this was a no-contact delivery, which meant that I was to leave the food at the door, take a picture of it, notify the person who ordered the food that their pizza was downstairs, and then they were responsible for coming to get it. So I walked up to the door and placed the food in a safe spot, and as I was taking my phone out of my pocket, I noticed a group of young men who looked to be no older than 16 down on the corner. I couldn't help but notice they all kept looking over at me. Now in my mind, I figured that they were just thinking about trying to take the food, so I wasn't concerned for my safety at all, and I continued about my business. I took my phone out and began taking a picture of the food, and then I even called the number that I was given for the person who ordered the food to let them know that their food was downstairs. I didn't want them to miss out on any of the delicious pizza. As I hung up the phone, I took another look down the corner of the block, and this time I saw the entire group had been staring my way. I'm not sure why, but this made me feel really uneasy, and I figured that it was time for me to go. As I went to turn toward my car, out of my peripheral vision, I could see the group had started moving. They were heading toward me. Again though, in my head, these kids just wanted the food, so I tried not to freak out and continued heading to my car. That was when I heard it. One of the young men yelled out to me, "Hey mister." I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again. "Hey mister, hang on a minute." To this day, I'm not sure why, but I stopped in my tracks and turned to face the group that was trying to get my attention. As I turned though, I quickly learned what their intentions were. As soon as I was facing them, I heard 3 sounds that almost sounded like small fireworks popping off. And at the same time, I saw 3 muzzle flashes from a small handgun that one of the teenagers was carrying. I didn't feel anything at first, but when my leg buckled underneath me, I looked down and knew right away that I had been hit. I fell to the floor and the pain began to kick in. I screamed out for help, thinking that surely I was about to be killed for some unknown reason. I was somewhat thankful, however, when the group ran past me and straight to my car, which still had the keys inside. I heard the sound of people around me screaming as the car pulled off. The person who had ordered the food had come outside by that point, and they were the ones who called the ambulance for me. I never got that car back, but thankfully, I was still able to walk after all was said and done, and I definitely learned a lesson about being aware of my surroundings.
Back when I first moved away for college, my mom and dad bought me this beat-up old Toyota Matrix so I could drive home whenever I'd wanted. I grew to hate the old piece of trash after a while, but it got me from point A to B, and it helped me get a job as a delivery driver for a pizza place, so I'll always appreciate the gesture. But then one night, when I was making a delivery, something happened that meant that from that night on, I never got into the driver's seat of it ever again. So, like I said, I'm making deliveries one night, and I'd just gotten back into my car after dropping off a bunch of pizzas at an apartment building when I suddenly realized I hadn't locked the passenger side door. And the only reason I realized I hadn't locked the door was because this guy opens up the door and climbs into my car. Then right as I'm about to tell the guy to get out, I see he has a gun. I'm too scared to even say anything, and he just points it right in my face and says all out of breath, "Drive." As I'm pulling into the street, literally trembling in my seat, I see these two cops sprinting out of an alley in my rear view, and that's when it hits me that they were probably chasing him, and they probably had enough time to call in my license plate. Turns out I was dead right about that, because the next thing I know, I see flashing lights in the rear view. I didn't even have to look over at the guy. I just see him raise the gun up, pointing it at me, and he says, "If you stop this car, I'll blow your head off." So I drove and kept driving until we were out in the suburbs. The whole time the cops are tailing, and they're not shouting like "pull over" or whatever through their bullhorns or whatever you call it. And I figured it's because they know that the guy basically carjacked me and that there's a hostage situation going on. The whole time the guy's like, "Drive faster." And all I can say is, "I can't. This thing's a piece of trash. If I put my foot down, the engine might freaking give out." So he's content to just delay the inevitable for as long as he could. I don't know exactly how long we were driving because the little digital clock was busted, but after a while we started to see fields and stuff. Then my gas light starts blinking, and I tell the guy that if we don't at least try and stop for gas, that we were eventually just going to come to a rolling stop. He tells me to stop at the next gas station we see, so that's exactly what I do. But not before the guy uses his phone to call 911, telling the operator exactly what's going on, and to tell cops that if they come near the car while we're topping up our gas, he's going to kill the hostage, i.e., me. We eventually pull into this gas station in the middle of nowhere, and I'm absolutely terrified. But I ask him if he wants me to get out to top off the tank. He looks around and sees it's one of those pumps that stays locked unless you pay first, so he says no. But he has to think of something out before he lets me get out of the car. The cops are keeping a safe distance while this is going on, as they obviously thought the guy was straight up ready to kill me. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't think that too. The whole time they're shouting over their mics like, "Let the hostage go, we can work something out, and no one has to die over this, Malcolm. Just surrender, and we'll get you help." He's stalling the whole time, pointing the gun to my head every so often to warn the cops off, and I swear that every time he did it, I thought he was going to pull the trigger and just end it. But looking back, if he did that, the cops would have just swarmed the car and shot him, or at least I think they would have anyway. Then there came a point where I could see that he was trying to work out how to get out of the mess he'd gotten himself into. He knew he couldn't get out of the car to get the clerk to unlock the pumps, as they'd ran for cover as soon as they saw that it was a dangerous situation, and there was no way for him to get their attention. Then he seemed convinced that if I got out of the car, I'd run off to the cops, like, right away, which, to be fair, was my number one escape plan at the time. He asked me how far we'd go if we just took off with the gas I had in the tank, and I told him about a mile or two, not far at all. And he lets out this real deep sigh, like a balloon deflating or something, which I suppose was exactly what was happening. He was all out of ideas, He knew this was the end of it, and right then, I realized that was the point that he was at his most dangerous. I was pretty much convinced that I was going to die by that point, having gotten it into my head that the guy was going to just go out in a blaze of glory by shooting me and then unloading the rest of his ammo onto the cops. And then when I heard him say himself, "Screw it," and he did something to the gun, like cock it or take the safety off, I thought to myself, this is it. This is how my life ends, in a trashy car with some loser maniac. I shut my eyes, felt my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard I could feel it shaking, and then bang. Only a second later, instead of feeling, well, nothing, I found I could open my eyes. But the first thing I saw when I opened them was a few specks of blood on the dash near the passenger side. Then when I turned, I instantly started dry heaving, because the guy had obviously put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, because there was a ton of blood and chunks of brain matter all over the ceiling of my car. I opened up the door and was puking with my hands raised above my head while I heard the cops shouting, "Get down on the ground." I had to lie in my own puke, man. Just lie there while they ran over with their guns on me just in case I was somehow in on it. It sounds crazy, but I really didn't mind. Knowing it was all over, that I was safe, well, relatively anyway, it was all gravy by that point. Like, I don't even think I can really describe that kind of relief in actual words. I literally felt high off of it. You see and hear about people crying in the aftermath of stuff like that, and I guess that's just how they deal with the emotion. But to me, it kind of felt like I'd won something. Like I beat the carjacker by surviving or whatever. Anyway, I better sign off before this starts sounding too abstract, but I can definitely say I wouldn't wish that kind of experience on anyone, ever.
I am a pizza delivery driver. This was by far the scariest thing to happen to me. It took place about 1 year ago. I was working on a Thursday night, which were usually decently busy. I made quite a few deliveries, and the later it got, the more things calmed down. At about 1 in the morning, I got a delivery for a cheese pizza. I put it into my car and drove to the location, which was about 10 minutes away. It was in an area of town which I rarely delivered to and was a little more run down. I got to the address, which was a 2-story house with a pretty decent-sized yard and many overgrown plants and trees. It looked a little bit run down like most houses in the area and had a front porch that seemed to wrap around the house. I got out of my car, grabbed the pizza, and walked up the driveway to the house. Then I walked up the steps to the door and rang the doorbell. About 30 seconds went by, and I was about to ring the bell again when the door started to open. A man answered. He was fairly large and bald and looked to be in his 50s. He just stood there staring at me for a second. I said I had his pizza and handed it to him. He looked almost surprised and said, "Oh, okay, that's nice." Then he just looked around. He just seemed a little bit strange to me. Then he said to me that he had to get some cash to tip me and he would be right back. He went back inside and closed the door. I stood there waiting for a good 2 or 3 minutes, but the man still didn't return. I was thinking about just leaving when I heard some noise and figured the man must be coming back. But when I listened closer, it wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from outside on the porch. I looked around to the direction of the noise. Then I saw from the side of the house on the porch 3 men approaching me about 30 feet away. I guess it was just an instinct, but as soon as I saw them, I turned and sprinted back down the porch to the driveway. When I did, I heard all the men start to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could to my car and unlocked it and then jumped inside. I frantically started the engine and stepped on the gas. As soon as my car started moving forwards, the men reached me. I felt one of them kick my back door, and another one tried opening the door on the other side, but I was just barely able to drive away. I sped out of the neighborhood and all the way back to the pizza place. I have to think that the pizza delivery was some sort of trap to lure me into getting robbed, or maybe even worse. I haven't delivered to that area much since, but when I do, I'm extra careful. I am a 21-year-old female. Around 3 years ago, when I turned 18, I decided to get a job as a pizza delivery driver. We lived in a small town, and there wasn't much, but there was a little pizza place. My older brother had worked there as a pizza delivery driver the year before. I went in one day to ask for an application to work there. The owner was a middle-aged man named Gary. He told me I was hired as soon as I asked for the application. I thought he must be joking, so I laughed, but then he said he was serious. I remember my brother had said that Gary was a little weird, but I didn't really mind as long as I had a job. I got trained the next week, and soon after was my first real day on the job. I was scheduled to work a night shift, and when I arrived, it was just me, Gary, and another kid that I went to high school with named Mike. Like I said, it was a small place and a small town, so it wasn't usually that busy. I waited around and swept the floors for a few minutes before an order for a delivery came in. How it would usually work is Gary would make the pizzas and then the drivers would deliver them. When the pizza was done, I was told to deliver it, so I took the address and then the pizza and got into my car. But when I did, Gary followed me. He told me he wanted to ride with me and make sure I did the delivery correct. I was a little annoyed because I knew I would get it right, and I didn't want him going with me. I thought it would be really awkward, and Gary just kind of gave me the creeps. He was the boss though, so I had to do what he told me to. I got in and drove to the address without a problem. Gary didn't really say anything during the drive, he just watched me. We arrived at the house and I got out and gave them the pizza. Gary stayed in the car and waited. When I got back to my car that was parked on the street, I saw that Gary was in the driver's seat now and was motioning for me to get in the passenger side. I got in and asked him why he was driving. He said he needed to show me something. I was getting a bad feeling, and I really didn't like Gary driving my car. I asked him again what he was doing, this time with a more stern tone in my voice. But he didn't answer me this time and focused his eyes on the road. He started driving back, but then made a turn that I realized was not the right way to go back. Then Gary spoke, but his tone of voice changed. He said, "Just shut up." I knew then that I was in trouble. I feared for what Gary might do, and he was much bigger than me. He took a road that led more into the wilderness, and we drove for several minutes. Then I saw a stop sign coming up. I did just what I felt I had to do, and as soon as the car came down to a slow enough speed, I opened the door and got out, and then I ran as far away as I could. I started running in some grass and then sort of a wooded area. As I was running, I heard his door open, and I heard him shouting, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. That made me run even faster. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away. I ran for as long as I could before running out of breath, and then I hid behind a tree. I didn't hear him or anything, so I decided to take out my phone and call my mother. I told her what had happened, and she had me turn my location on so she could pick me up. She arrived about 15 minutes later and then called the police. My car and Gary had both vanished. He ended up being found and arrested a week later. My car was found in his garage. His restaurant was shut down, and I ended up getting a job at a local grocery store instead. I recently moved across the country to a new town to go to school. I was able to land a job as a pizza delivery driver pretty easily. I've done this job before, and I like it because it's relatively easy and I make good money on tips. I work a lot of really late night shifts. A couple of weeks ago, I was working and at about 2 a.m. an order came in. It was for a large cheese pizza. At that hour, it was just a couple of us working, so I made the pizza myself and then put it in my car and went to deliver it. I didn't know the area very well, so I would always put the address in on my phone and then just follow the directions. I got in my car and typed it in. It said it was a 15-minute drive. As I drove, it seemed to be taking me into the middle of nowhere. I drove for about 10 minutes through woods with not a building or house in sight. Then finally, I was supposed to turn onto a little dirt road that I could barely see. If it hadn't showed up on my map, I would have almost certainly missed it. I slowed down and then turned onto the little dirt road. The map showed me continuing on this road for about 1 more mile, and then I would take a left, and the destination would be there. I began driving down the dirt road, which was surrounded by woods. Then suddenly, my phone lost signal. I wasn't all that surprised being so far out from the city, but I was concerned because I needed to find the house to deliver the pizza. I kept driving very slowly and looked for a road on the left side. Finally, I saw it and I turned. The road was another dirt one, but the woods on each side was even more dense. It was very eerie being out there on that road at that time of night, especially not knowing where I was. I drove down the road very slowly, looking on both sides for a house or some kind of building for whoever ordered a pizza out here. But all I saw was trees from the dense woods and some grass. I still had no service at all on my phone, but I knew I had to be close to where the delivery was supposed to be. It was very dark and hard to see, with the only lights coming from my headlights. I wasn't seeing any kind of buildings at all. I started to get a really creepy feeling being out there, and after about 5 minutes of driving down that road looking, I decided to turn around and go back, because I could clearly see that there was no buildings. I drove my car back to the other dirt road, and then back to where I had signal before. At last, I was finally able to get connection on my phone, and when I did, I looked at the map again, but the address had been erased and it was not there. I found the card that I had wrote the address on and put it back into my phone, but this time it said address not found. I decided I would just head back and try to figure out what was going on. When I got back to the store, I showed my boss the address and told him what happened. He looked surprised when I gave him this information. Then he told me that there are no houses or buildings in that area at all. I went back to look at the order that had come in, but it was gone. I chalked it up to a lack of sleep, but to this day, I really don't know how to explain what happened. Maybe I was just really tired, but it was still a really creepy experience.
Growing up in a small town in Colorado, there weren't a ton of options for work as a 19-year-old who didn't go to college. So when I got my license, I ended up grabbing a job for one of the local diners that I used to love eating at. They had a delivery position, and I also bussed tables when there were no orders to be delivered. The radius for delivery wasn't too large, only about 3.5 miles. But considering the area around the town was mostly mountainous woods, some deliveries could take nearly 40 minutes. This wasn't a problem though. I loved driving, and I loved all the scenery around me as I made my deliveries. One night, however, Mother Nature showed me how truly terrifying she could be. What happened was that the diner got a delivery order, and right away I recognized the address. It was one of our regulars, and after their food was made, it would only be a 15-minute drive for me. When I got in my car, I didn't even have to use the GPS because I knew the exact house I was going to. It was a small, single-story house that was in the middle of the woods. I loved this house's long gravel driveway. I would always see small critters like squirrels and other animals running through the trees and along the stone wall that lined the path. The driveway would then open up to an area that had room for about 4 cars to park in, which I loved because they only ever had 1 car in the driveway, so I had enough space to simply turn around instead of having to reverse and make a K-turn. As I made my way down the driveway that evening, I was surprised that I didn't see any animals scurrying around, but I figured since it's getting cold again, it was just that time of year. So I drove all the way down the driveway and pulled in front of the house. As I got out of the car, I couldn't help but feel like someone or something was staring at me. I just brushed it off as the owner looking out of their window, though, and continued around my car to the passenger side to get the food. As I'm leaning into the passenger side of the car, I heard the sound of something moving around behind me. I stood up straight and quickly turned to see what it was, but there was nothing there. I shrugged and continued to get the food out of my car. This time, though, as I was closing the passenger door, I heard what was an unmistakable, deep, growling noise coming from the trees. I tried my best to look into the dark forest where the noise was coming from. As I slowly backed toward the house, that was when I saw it. A medium-sized black bear came running out of the woods. I could hear the snarling coming from it. With each step it took, I turned and sprinted toward the house. And when I reached the steps, I didn't waste time knocking. I grabbed the handle and thankfully, the door was unlocked, so I was able to rush inside. I apologized to the homeowners for barging in like that, but once they looked out their window, they understood. To this day, I still don't think that bear was trying to attack me. If it wanted to get me, it was more than fast enough. If I had to guess, it probably had cubs nearby and was trying to scare me off. Still, I'll never forget the look of those teeth as they charged toward me.
This happened in 2004. I was a new college graduate starting my career in healthcare at a hospital 2 hours away from where I grew up. The hospital I worked at was huge, a level 1 trauma center. I work in a highly specialized area. There were only 2 other people at the hospital with my licensure. That's important because we spent a lot of time working alone in our department and had to stagger our shifts for coverage. I had the early shift. I arrived at 5:45 in the morning. Staff parking was several city blocks away from the hospital, and they sent a shuttle to pick employees up. The lot was surrounded by an urban forest. The city tried to leave as much green space and trees as possible. There was nothing else near the parking lot at the time. Since I arrived so early, the shuttle service had to be called when I arrived. The call button was located at the shuttle stop, meaning you had to leave your car to communicate with the dispatch. I was always creeped out because, even though there were parked cars, there were never any employees in the lot at the time I came in. The overnight shift didn't change until 7 a.m. A few weeks after I started working there, I had settled into the shuttle routine and gotten more comfortable. At this time, cell phone service was spotty at best, and I didn't own a smartphone, so it wasn't very reliable. One afternoon, when I returned to my car, I found a note left on my windshield. It read, "Hot and sweet you are." I glanced around and didn't see anyone. I was perplexed, but not really frightened. Another week passed. I forgot about the note, until one afternoon I returned to my car and found a flower in the windshield wiper and another note. This one read, "I really love your dimples. I could make you smile." What the heck? I had just moved to this town and didn't have any friends beyond the other 2 people in my department. I didn't know anyone else. I did feel creeped out this time, and began feeling like I was being watched or something. Early in the mornings, I would park as close to the shuttle stop as possible, buzz the dispatch, and then wait in my car with the doors locked. I often imagined I heard shuffling noises like shoes scraping through the gravel, and I couldn't see all the way to the dark corners of the lot. When I returned to my car in the afternoons, I carried my pepper spray just in case. I told my coworkers about the notes, and they told me I should tell security. I felt a little silly, but I made a report. Security said they would keep an eye out, whatever that meant. I stopped parking in that lot. opting instead to find parking on the street nearer to the hospital where there were other people around. Things went fine for the next few weeks, until one day I got another note. This time, it was on my car one morning, outside my apartment building. In the same scribbly handwriting, it simply read, "Don't be shy." I was so confused. What did this person want? Obviously, they were following me, and now they knew where I lived, and probably knew I lived alone. I contacted the police. There wasn't much they could do, but they did make some safety recommendations and said they would patrol the neighborhood more often. I took a self-defense class and was hyper-aware of my surroundings. It was worse not knowing who I was dealing with. A few weeks later, a woman was found assaulted and murdered in the trees behind the employee parking lot. They caught the guy a couple days later. I recognized him. He was a contract painter who had been working in my area. The hospital had been remodeling our department, and this painter would come in early, around 6:30 a.m. I made coffee every morning in the break room, and he would come in to get a cup. We made small talk a few times, but never any red flags. Then it came back to me. Sometimes he would call me Dimples. I shivered. "Good morning, Dimples." I was shocked that he had literally been right under my nose for weeks. I had been totally alone with him on many occasions, and I never suspected anything. I don't know for certain that he was the one leaving the notes, but they stopped after he was arrested. Anyway, stay safe out there, guys and gals. When I was in college, I worked the night shift one summer vacation. I was 19 years old and an average-looking female. I wasn't enthused about having to work a job over the summer, but it was the only way I was going to be able to afford tuition. Working night shift was probably the weirdest experience of my life. It was at the McDonald's drive-thru. I still remember my first night on the job. This lady came in and was talking to someone while she was waiting for us to take her order. She sounded extremely upset, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. It sounded like it was directed at someone in the back seat. I immediately assumed that she was abusing her children. I'm a psychology major, so I naturally pick up on stuff like that. She ordered 3 Big Macs and 3 large Cokes. My intuition has been wrong. When she pulled up to pay for her meal, she was completely alone. I was honestly a little startled. Why would this lady be here ordering this much food and screaming in her car if she was alone? I couldn't wrap my head around the situation. She was otherwise polite. She was nice as she spoke to me and paid for her food and left. She even told me to have a good night. She had been the only customer we had in a probably 45-minute window. And after she left, I saw some of my coworkers laughing at me. I asked, "What's so funny?" And he told me that it was my first encounter with Schizo Susan. They told me that she regularly did stuff like this, and always showed up at all hours of the night to order seemingly too much food. She was always yelling at people in her car, but there was never anyone actually in her car. They didn't actually know her name, so they just started calling her Schizo Susan. They told me that there were occasional nights when she was the only customer to come through the drive-thru at all. I found it extremely unnerving. I immediately started wondering what was wrong with this woman. About a week went by. She came in every night, just like they said. And in between speaking to me to order her food and picking up her food, she was always yelling at someone. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was up. So I formulated a plan. I was just going to ask her who she was speaking to. You know, play it off like I thought she was talking to me. It was the best I could come up with without seeming abrasive. I remember it being a Friday night when I decided I was going to do it. I had chickened out a couple of times, but I figured that since I don't work the weekends, may as well try something new to end my last shift for the week. Well, the night that I did it, I listened in to her screaming for a few more seconds than I normally did. You see, I can listen to what people are saying through the McDonald's speaker without them necessarily knowing that I'm listening. If I don't say anything, they would never know. I normally never did this because it's kind of frowned upon. I'm pretty sure there's some kind of rule against it. But I listened for maybe 20 or 30 seconds. I listened for long enough to know that she was yelling at someone named Darian. When she was in the middle of saying something, I interrupted her and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, were you speaking to me?" She just replied, "No." Crap, I thought to myself. I knew that I had to try something else. I asked her if Darian would be ordering with her. Then she went silent. It wasn't an entire minute, but she didn't say anything. After the second time of asking her if she was still there, she let out a banshee scream. It was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. It really hurt my ears. The McDonald's microphone system is already pretty loud, but when someone screams into it, trust me when I say that it is the most unbearable thing you have ever experienced. I was also surprised at how long she screamed. She had one deep, loud, guttural scream going for like 30 entire seconds. In the moment, though, I was scared for my life. I also got really worried that I was going to lose my job. I felt really guilty for asking, like it was my fault for setting her off. In retrospect, I don't think I really did anything horrible to her. Literally just asked her if the person whose name she was screaming just a minute ago was also going to be ordering food. She didn't actually say anything when she screamed. It was just kind of a violent and guttural screaming. I was really taken aback there for a minute. How the heck do you even respond to that? I asked her if she wanted to continue placing her order, and that's when she just drove away. She really floored it and drove way faster than she should have. And as she drove by, I saw her face looking at me through the window. It must have been only a split second that I could see her, but I got that one really good look at her. She looked extremely distressed, and as if things couldn't get any weirder, the microphone system stopped working correctly the rest of the night. I think she screamed loud enough to break something in it. That was hands down the weirdest thing to ever happen to me throughout any jobs I've ever worked. And this weird lady just disappeared after that. She stopped coming to McDonald's altogether. I asked some of my other coworkers how long she had been stopping by for her nightly visits, and they all said that it was for as long as they can remember, which probably meant at least a year. I felt somewhat guilty for pissing this lady off so bad, but I think it is safe to say she probably needs some serious mental help. I haven't worked at McDonald's in a long time, and I don't ever plan on working fast food again. I just hope that wherever that lady ended up, she got the help that she so desperately and obviously needed. I was 22 and lived in my parents' house while they had left South Africa to work abroad. My grandmother moved in with me to help out as I was a single mother while still studying in university. In the end, we helped each other because she was also on oxygen due to chronic lung disease. Growing up in South Africa, we are taught from a very young age that it's important to make sure all doors are locked and windows are closed at night. Being a very private person, I would always have my curtains closed. People can be extremely nosy here. Well, one night after a long day of studies and simply being a mom, we locked all the doors and shut the windows, pulling all the curtains closed to settle in for the night. Now, my son was not a great sleeper and would often wake up throughout the night. After dozing off, later that evening he woke me up asking for his bottle, and I decided to check the time, slightly blinded by the TV's light. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. 10 p.m. Something wasn't right. I felt like we weren't alone. As I peered through the doorway into the passage, I could have sworn I saw a dark shadow almost crawling across the tiled floor. I'm imagining things. I must be. Shrugging it off, I pass my son his bottle. Still, I swear I'm hearing sounds, like someone coming up the stairs this time, but that's in the opposite direction. The railing creaks, and I'm about to get out of my bed to check, when a face peeks around the corner of my bedroom door. Gran, is that you? Expecting her to be needing help with something, so I reach for my phone to create light, as I had already switched the TV off again. A man storms into my room and grabs my phone before I can hide it. I'm in so much shock, yet I know exactly what is going on at that moment. Take whatever you want. Please, just don't hurt us, I say calmly. He puts his index finger to his lips. Shh. He's just standing there, as though he is waiting and watching guard. Then suddenly, 3 other men rush in and ask question after question. Where's the safe? Where's the weapons? Where's this and that? They were all armed, and I had no idea what they had planned for us. I just couldn't keep up, trying to answer all their questions. Why would I, a single mother in a house with her child and grandmother, have a weapon? In all honesty, I've never even owned one. They took everything, and then insisted on taking my car keys. I tried telling them I couldn't remember where I had put them, but they stuck a weapon in my 2-year-old son's face and asked again, "Where are the keys?" So I told them where I thought I had left them. After going through all my things, taking what they wanted, and were then ready to leave, I'm presuming they were throwing everything into my car for the getaway. The one guy chose to stick around in my room a little longer. "Give me a kiss," he whispered. Oh no, I was shouting in my mind, still trying to stay composed. He put out his hand and took mine. Then the others called for him, and as he pulled away, I dug my nails into his hand and scratched. If I was going to do anything, I was going to get DNA off one of them. If no one could see what was going on in my home, I would find a way to get justice. "Don't scream," they said, and ran down the stairs. I ran down after them and screamed as loud as I could for help from the neighbors, as they sped off in my car. Standing outside in the pitch black, calling for anyone to help us. And yet no one heard. It felt like hours had passed. No phones, no laptops, no means of contact. They took everything, and I couldn't even call my parents. To this day, these men have never been caught, and I wonder, if I had my curtains open, perhaps someone might have seen. People were still awake. I am now 35, and since that night, I refuse to go to sleep without my curtains open, and at least one light on. Most people don't even believe me when I tell them, but I have a job where I work from home. People in my area mostly work with cars or in the medical industry. There aren't many jobs where I live. Thankfully, I was able to land a decent paying job that let me work from my home office. It definitely comes with its struggles, but it is hands down the best job opportunity available to me right now. It isn't always perfect. It definitely comes with its pitfalls. Sometimes you have to sit at your computer even when there isn't any work to be done. It's also very easy to get distracted. But I think my biggest problem has to do with the house itself. It's kind of creepy. The house itself is an old Victorian, like really old. We're talking mid-1800s. A family friend owned the house and sold it to me for a very fair price. Basically gave it to me. I was super excited because it meant I got a nice big house to live in by myself along with my girlfriend. I'm a natural loner and don't really care for social interaction. So I had a nice big house all to myself and girlfriend and a job where I worked from home with very minimal social interaction with other people. That was basically my ideal life. But the house's age meant that it was going to be scary at times. And I don't mean with ghosts or anything like that, but sometimes I hear the house settling or making noises that I can't explain. I've actually had quite a few instances where I'll be sitting down and doing some work, and then out of nowhere, I hear a noise that I just can't rationalize. I go exploring throughout the house, only to find that nothing has changed. It's as ominous as it is frustrating. I did what just about anyone else in the world would do. I started to use background noise to drown out the disturbances. First, I tried those quiet instrumentals on YouTube. You know, the ones that last 5 hours and they're supposed to put you at ease or something. It didn't really work for me because I couldn't get my computer to be loud enough to drown out all the noises. It was also not very good at keeping my attention. There was one week where my work was really slow and there wasn't a whole lot to do. I still had to sit at my computer though. There was an understanding that I was allowed to basically do anything I wanted as long as I was available to my coworkers if something came through that needed to be done. I didn't quite know what to do with this time and just started watching documentaries on YouTube. It actually was pretty fun. I learned a lot. So that next week when things started picking up again, I just instinctively turned on a documentary. I wouldn't be able to have all my focus on it, but it was a lot better than having some ambient noise. It actually helped distract me from the sounds of the house. I guess I just didn't have enough mental focus energy to notice any of the other sounds going on around me, if that makes any sense. Well, it had been about 2 weeks of me watching documentaries while I worked. Everything seemed to be good, until one Friday morning. I start work at 8, and this must have happened around 10. I was sitting at my office chair working, while I listened to a documentary about a 9/11 conspiracy theory, when all of a sudden, I heard an abrupt banging noise coming from upstairs. Like I had said, I hadn't been distracted by any noises for a while by this point. So, the fact that I noticed this noise meant that it was probably serious. My fight or flight kicked in. You might laugh at me, but when I work, I keep a knife next to me. I ran upstairs with the knife and looked around for any suspicious noises. The banging had stopped, and I didn't know where it had come from. I knew what section of the house that I heard it from, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. I stood there for a few moments, and then I heard it again. It happened right on the other side of my door. I immediately braced myself for there to be some kind of animal or something trying to get in. I didn't really know what to expect. I opened my door to see that the screen door had not been properly closed. My girlfriend didn't close it all the way when she left for work that morning. It was also pretty windy that day, so it was just going back and forth, causing a banging noise when the wind got bad. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I didn't want to live my life in constant paranoia and fear of some kind of attacker coming into my home. We live in a safe area. There's never been a serious threat, and I have run around my house with a knife way too many times now. I honestly felt kind of stupid, so I made a decision. I was no longer going to assume that someone was breaking in if and when I ever heard a sound. I put the knife in my dresser in my bedroom and decided that I was just going to be into work while I was working. Except for my documentary, of course. So, there I was the next week. It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my office doing exactly what I had set out to do. I was working, ignoring the noises and listening to a documentary. I remember the exact part of the documentary I was on when I heard it. The sound was the loudest sound I had heard in the house up to that point. At first, I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I need to fight against this paranoia. The sound continued, and I couldn't take my mind off it. After about 5 minutes of listening to what sounded like rummaging and walking, I went upstairs to check. Bear in mind, I didn't have any weapon on me, and I was expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. When I got to my kitchen, I saw that the front door was wide open. The cabinets were all open, and there was a strange man rummaging through them. I didn't notice until after the fact, but he had been eating something. I remember screaming at him. I don't remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "What are you doing in my house?" Then he just ran off. Didn't say a word. He took a loaf of bread with him, but I don't think he took anything else, other than what he had eaten before I came upstairs. I reasoned with myself that he must have been a homeless man or something. I don't know why else you would steal a loaf of bread from a very ordinary-looking house. This was the worst thing that could have happened. On some instinctive level, it had proved all my worst fears right. There was some kind of danger in my house. And of course, it was the one time when I didn't have my knife on me. I lucked out that he didn't try to hurt me or anything, but it was still horrifying to see nonetheless. I just work at a local coffee shop now. It's the only way to stay sane. Before I start this story off, this was about a year ago, and though I do have some thoughts that this was sleep paralysis, I am leaning more towards the idea of it just being a nightmare. What makes me think that it could have been sleep paralysis was the fact that I heard my brother go to the bathroom, and when I woke up, he was coming out of the bathroom, but I could have just heard the bathroom door close in my sleep, and my mind included it in my nightmare, since it is a common occurrence. During the time of which this occurred, I was asleep in my room and my door a little less than halfway open. I felt awake, and I was asleep on my left side. To give you a quick layout of my room, as it is relevant to the story, my bed was centered against the wall, while my door is in front of my bed, all the way to the right of the front wall. To the left of my bed, I have a mirror, which allows me to see my door even if I am facing away from it. As I had my eyes closed, I heard my brother walk into the bathroom and shut the door, making the area outside of my room dark, since the only source of light that was illuminating the hallway was closed off. Suddenly, from my mirror, I saw a tall, lengthy woman walk up to my doorway. She looked drenched, and her skin was a grayish color. Since it was dark, I couldn't make out too many details, but all I know is that I was terrified out of my mind. I tried moving, but of course, I couldn't. I couldn't even make out the smallest noise. All I could do was hope that my brother would walk out of the bathroom, and this dream or sleep paralysis episode would end. I squeezed my eyes shut, not wanting to see the thing for much longer. This was when I didn't have carpet in my room, so the sound of her dropping to the ground was even more audible than it normally would have been. It almost sounded like someone dropped a huge piece of meat on a hard floor, with the exception of the sound of her bones cracking when she did so. My breathing became rapid as I heard her crawl on all fours toward my side of the bed, almost inhumanly fast. I kept my eyes shut, fearing that if I opened them, it would take long to get over the horrifying face that I would see. All I heard for those few seconds was breathing, and my heart beating in my ears. This was in a whisper tone. "Open your eyes." Out of nowhere, I was snapped awake, and let out a small scream as I thought the woman was still in the room. But she wasn't. There was no one by my bed. The bathroom door opened and my brother peeked into my room, confused. I didn't have to say a word, and he just switched on the light for me and went back to his room. But I stayed up for a few hours after that, being too scared to go back to sleep. Terrified I would see that same woman and hear that same voice. Open your eyes.
I've been working at my local McDonald's for 4 years now, and it's one of the most annoying jobs I've ever had. People coming in left and right and through the drive-thru with orders piling up was honestly enough to make the average worker irritated. I sure as hell had to go through it all, and there would even be times where I couldn't finish up customers' orders. If you've ever worked at McDonald's, you get where I'm coming from. This happened around a year ago, right before the pandemic hit, and I was working overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnight, so I had no interactions with any customers until then. I was working a 7-hour shift, which was a usual overnight shift for us. It was around 9 p.m. and I had just finished putting in a customer's order when I noticed a man talking to a young boy near the play area. Yes, we were still one of the few restaurant chains that still actually had one. The man is kneeled down to the little boy's height, and right away the boy seemed very uncomfortable. I dismiss it as the boy probably having a rough day with who I assume was his father trying to calm him down. I remained focused on putting in customers' orders and try not to interfere with whatever was going on. Suddenly, the man grabs the boy's arm and they're heading in the direction of the front door that leads out into the parking lot. At that point, I couldn't keep my mouth shut and was about to say something when I hear someone yell, "Hey, what the hell are you doing with her son?" Just then, the mother comes out of the restroom and the man is petrified. His face was pale and his eyes were as big as saucers and tried to cover it up by saying, "Oh, this is your child. I'm so sorry. He looked lost and I was just trying to help him find his parents." His mumbles and incompetent use of wording clearly gave away as to what he was actually trying to do. The mother gave him an uncomfortable smile that had "Stay the hell away from my kid" written all over. Police were called, but I wasn't sure if he was caught or not.
I was 19 years old at the time. I had a really good opportunity to go to college, but things fell through a couple of months into it, and basically, I wasn't allowed to go back at that college. I'm not going to go into the details, but I found myself stuck. I was living at home with my parents and working at McDonald's most of the time. I was really disappointed in myself, especially because I didn't have anyone else to blame but myself. I seemed to be your typical college dropout that ended up working at fast food. But while I was working there, I had a couple of really strange experiences. So the first one happened like this. There was this really creepy customer. He was an old man, and he just seemed like the most insane individual ever. You just have to think of the physical embodiment of Florida Man. He always wore this bathroom robe with a stained white t-shirt underneath. Or shoes. He had these really old Nikes that seemed like they had been completely covered in mud and never washed. Everywhere he stepped, there was some residue coming off of his shoes. I don't know how far he lived, but this guy came in to eat at McDonald's 4 or 5 times a day for as long as I worked there. I never personally had any horrible experiences with him. It wasn't like he was this unruly customer. He always asked for extra ketchup, but it's not like that was a crime or anything. The story is weird because I remember talking about him with some of my coworkers. I had one friend there that I became rather close with. I remember talking with her about this creepy guy that had just came in to eat McDonald's all the time wearing his pajamas. When you work with the public, there are so many people and faces that you see all the time, and none of them mean anything. It's just another customer. But when you have someone like this, it almost makes the job a little bit more bearable. As weird as that might sound, a little bit more consistency to the job. Plus, making jokes about someone like that was kind of fun. But there was one day when the jokes weren't funny anymore, because he stopped coming in. They couldn't find out why either. I mean, when you see someone multiple times a day, every day for months on end, you get a little surprised when they stop showing up. It all just seemed, I don't know, unusual. I remember talking to my friend about it. Neither of us could imagine why he stopped. I remember getting a phone call at 2 a.m. that night, though. I guess my friend had gotten curious and looked around online. She's a bit of an insomniac. I guess he had been arrested on multiple drug charges. She had found a picture of him in the public database for our county's police department. In the mugshot, he was wearing that exact same bathrobe that we always saw him wearing. That was interesting. Really weird to think that someone I saw and interacted with multiple times a day was an actual dealer. But I guess that was that. My other experience working at McDonald's was really bad. Not going to lie to you, it really freaks me out and really made me question humanity. So it happened like this, right? I was working the graveyard shift. It must have been around 12 a.m. and we didn't have any customers. We already cleaned all the machines as much as we could, and there really wasn't anything to do. We lived in a smaller community, so there weren't too many people coming in to eat at such a late hour. We had a few here and there, but we were mostly just sitting around, particularly slow this night. I remember going over to check the garbage cans for the other side of the store. Occasionally, we would forget to empty that garbage pail. It was directly behind a booth and out of sight from the area we normally worked in. I remember going over there, and there were 2 big bags of garbage that needed to be taken out. They were too heavy to take out at the same time, so I did what any sane person would do. I carried one out at a time. I remember bringing the first one. I threw it into the dumpster, and I remember hurting my back a little when I did it. I went for a little bit of a theatrical throw and really felt it there. I went back into the store to get the second bag of garbage, and I made my way outside. I got about 10 feet away from the dumpster when I saw something that shocked me. I dropped the bag of garbage. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a mutilated puppy. I wasn't sure if it was alive or not. It wasn't moving or anything. I took a step closer to try to see a little bit more, and I just felt my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in person. It was definitely dead. It wasn't leaning up against the dumpster, and it was just a horrifying thing to see. I ran back inside and asked my coworkers what we should do. We decided to call the police, but they didn't really help much. We were really freaked out at who could have possibly done this and why they would put the puppy there of all places. And the part that still freaks me out is that whoever had done this had been waiting for me to go back inside of the building, and in the few seconds before I came back out, put it right next to the dumpster. I figured they must have been watching me. Didn't know what else to think about it, though. Our McDonald's didn't have an outside camera other than the drive-thru, so there was no hope of trying to identify the person that did this. But it still makes me sick to my stomach to think what that person could be like.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
So at the time, I was a 16-year-old female working in McDonald's. Now, at the McDonald's I worked at, when you're on headset, you're normally required to be at the first window to also take payment. My job position was customer care manager at the time, so my job was meant to be on the front desk, but 99% of the time they required me behind the tills. So I was having a normal day, working a long shift, but still having a normal working day. I happened to be on headset and first window that day. Anyway, my headset buzzes letting me know there's someone at my drive-thru lane. I go through to the first window to answer my customer, and this is how the conversation ensued. Me. Hello, welcome to McDonald's, what can I get you? Him.
Oh wow, you've got a beautiful voice.
His voice was very grunty and husky sounding, not off-putting though. We have all sorts of customers come through McDonald's every day, so nothing gave me the creeps at this point, but his voice was very recognizable. Thank you, sir, how very flattering. What can I get you?
I haven't decided yet. Can I just come around to the first window to decide? I want to see who I'm talking to.
Now, we weren't very busy, and at this point the creeper hadn't actually creeped me out yet. I mean, all he had done really was pay me a compliment, and we quite often had people complain that they liked the face-to-face contact. So it was definitely not unusual to get a request like this. Yes sir, that's fine.
Wow, you're just as beautiful as you sound.
Thank you sir, have you decided what you're going to have to eat?
Are you an option?
I laughed this off. It was my first job and I wasn't the rude kind of person when someone was paying a compliment. I must also point out that this man must have been around in his 60s. I remember that he had one lazy eye that looked to the left, painfully awful teeth, and patchy dark brown hair. At this point, I was getting a little bit uncomfortable now, but was still more than willing to take his order.
I'll have a cheeseburger.
Okay sir, are you paying cash or card? Without answering my question, he started asking where I'm from and how old I was, etc., etc. But it wasn't until his last few questions that I really got weirded out now.
What time do you finish work?
7:30, why? I didn't actually finish at 7:30, but 7:30 was the first number that came into my head when I blurted it out. I finished at 8 and would probably do some overtime as well, but I wasn't about to let him know that.
You know, I can meet you if you want. I can pick you up outside and we can go somewhere.
All the while he's saying this, he has this horrendous grin on his face and keeps winking at me. I'm really sorry, sir, but I'm not allowed to meet with customers outside of work, as it's against our employee policy. This was utter BS, but I needed to get him to leave me alone, and this was the only thing I could think of to say at the time. He carries on being insistent, but not getting the picture. I cut the conversation short. Anyway, sir, sorry to be rude, but can I have the money for your cheeseburger?
Yes, sorry. See you at 7:30.
Off he drove to the next window. I was gobsmacked. I'd already said I wasn't going to see him. I was a little bit shocked, but I was not going to go over there and give him the satisfaction of talking to him again. My coworker came to me and said, "Ooh, that guy had a major crush on you and wanted your number, but I didn't give it to him. He's old enough to be your dad." Anyway, I explained exactly what had happened and how uncomfortable it made me. 7:30 came and my coworker is spooked. Creeper is waiting in the car park for me, just like he said he would. He sat halfway down the car park and you can just see him staring in. Now, our car park wasn't very big. It only had 4 rows of parking spaces, so he wasn't that far away and would have clocked me the minute I walked out the door. At this point, I'm really freaking out and head to the back of the store where hopefully he can't see me. I had to stay at the back of the store for about 40 minutes before we knew it was safe to come out. Fast forward a week later, and the creepers return to the drive-thru. And guess who's back on headset at window 1? Me. I heard his voice and recognized it straight away.
Hey, I was hoping I'd hear your voice again. Why didn't you meet me the other day?
Just 1 second, sir. I'll be with you in 1 second. I immediately handed my headset to my manager and gave him a quick briefing on the situation. He gladly took the headset and dealt with the customer from start to finish. When my manager came back to let me know he had gone, he said the creeper had been asking my name, my address, and my surname. My manager said that he was the most creepiest guy he had ever met, and I was never to have anything to do with him again. If he came to work while I was there, afterwards my manager would have me head to the back room while he dealt with the creep. He always asked about me, every single time. I'm a 16-year-old female working as a customer care manager on the front of house for our McDonald's. Now, where I am from, when you are front of house, you're required to wear a light stripped top, a yellow neck scarf, and a pencil skirt just below the knee which has a small split up the back. I always button my shirt right up to the very top, so I always looked very modest, and I would never say a McDonald's uniform is attractive. Anyway, when I worked at McDonald's, I always put my all into everything I did, so I knew tills, drive-through, drinks, serving, etc. I've also always been someone that will happily have a conversation with someone to make their experience enjoyable, and hopefully make them want to come back. I was working on tills when this creeper came through the door. He was a tall blonde bodybuilder, at least around 50 years old though. He came to the till and ordered and didn't look very happy, so I asked the obvious questions. How was your day, etc. He had made small talk and we got to chatting about both of our days. After that, he then tells me,
"It's nice to see someone smile around here for once. Everyone else is so grumpy."
Nice enough compliment. I was used to it. He was right though. Not many people here enjoyed this job, but, I mean, it is McDonald's. He starts coming in around once a week on a Wednesday morning. Each morning he would come in, we would have a chat. If I was on the floor, meaning front of house, we would sit and chat at a table, and my managers were fine with this, as they knew it made each customer's experience unique. We got to know each other's names. His name was Michael. I started college on a Wednesday and Thursday and worked at McDonald's part-time, so my shifts changed. I worked Mondays, Tuesdays, and Saturdays instead of Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and sometimes extra days if they needed me. Michael started coming into McDonald's every day to find when I was working. First red flag, but I figured he was just lonely and needs someone to talk to. Anyway, he worked out my shift pattern and came in on Tuesdays instead, after asking me why I wasn't in on Wednesdays because he missed our chats. He'd do this thing where he'd let someone else go in front of him if it meant that he could come to my till instead. He would wait to one side to get served by me. Odd, but I didn't think too much of it, just thought he was a man that liked to be served by someone with a smile and had taken a liking to me. Again, we chatted when he came in. Now, this is where it got a bit more weird. We were sat down talking and he decided to really open up to me. He told me how him and his wife were going through a messy divorce. He started going into details of why. He told me he had punched his son. Now, this guy was big, like he looked like a bodybuilder. I can't remember exactly what had happened, but he had ended up smacking his wife too, I think. And here he was telling me all about it. I mean, I'm no counselor. After proceeding to tell me how big his house was, probably to try and grip my attention, he started telling me how he was living in the basement of the house that he owned and it wasn't fair.
"I'm going to hit her again if this carries on."
Well, apparently the wife and son wanted him out and they were gonna have it and not pay him for it, blah blah blah. He wasn't letting that happen, his son won't talk to him, blah blah blah. He then started asking me for advice. Again, a 16-year-old girl. I didn't really know what to say, so I just sort of said, "Well, everything happens for a reason, I suppose." And as I went to get up, he asked me to sit back down. Now, I had already been sat there for near on half an hour, and I know I said my managers don't mind, but that's pushing it a bit. So I told him I really had to go. He carried on trying to get me to sit back down, but let me go in the end. Now, this may seem totally unrelated, but trust me, it will make sense later on. You know how in McDonald's we have the sauce pumps, right? Well, they're connected to a big bag of sauce which has a popper on the top of it. You basically pop the tube into the popper of the bag. But Jesus Christ, this thing is fiddly. It can take me about 10 minutes just to get it connected, then to put the heavy bag in the holder on the side is another 5 minutes. It's a nightmare. Now back to the story. The sauce had run out and I had to fiddle about getting it in. Where the sauce dispenser is right opposite from where Michael always sits. I could feel his eyes burning into my back as I did this, and anytime I turn around he would always be looking at me with a smile. It made me feel a fair bit uncomfortable, but hey ho, it's my job and you deal with this stuff all the time. Trust me, he's not the first person I've had perving at my bum. He came back a few more times and each time he did I felt more and more uneasy. He started being a bit more personal now, telling me he thought I was a pretty young girl and we should meet up for coffee at some point, and I politely declined. Michael then said this.
Can I ask you something personal?
Depends what it is. I can't really promise I'll answer.
Are you a virgin?
I'm not answering that.
What size are your boobs?
I have a boyfriend and I'm not very comfortable answering these kinds of questions.
Do you love your boyfriend? Would you leave your boyfriend for me?
My boyfriend is behind the counter and I don't think he'll be very happy with you asking questions like that.
Well, just make sure he treats you right. You're a lovely girl.
Anyway, I won't be coming back here for quite a while, so can I have your number? No, I don't think my boyfriend would be happy with that either. After that, I go to the back room to calm myself, as this was very unnerving for me. He was an older guy being very strange and asking super inappropriate questions of me. He knew my age as I had told him previously. The day continued. He had left and I continued and went home. When I woke up the next morning, I had a message on WhatsApp, a message on Facebook, and a friend request on there, and an Instagram follow as well. It was Michael. I don't know how, but he had found all of my personal accounts just through my first name. The only way I can think of him finding it out is asking a colleague what my surname is and getting my number out of one of them. Maybe he was friendly with one of my other workers and got my number from them. I don't know. He had sent me a message saying how he needed to see more of my pictures, but he saw my main pictures for them and my WhatsApp photo. He had also sent me another message about how he loved looking at my butt when I was bent over crawling on the floor to fix the sauce bags, and saying all the things he would love to do to me. At that point I noped out and I blocked him on everything. I still sometimes get messages from other accounts he has made, wishing me a Merry Christmas, etc., even though he should have gotten the gist of me not wanting to talk to him. Luckily for me, I moved away about a week or so after that happened. Thank God. So I worked in a McDonald's in the UK, and the area my McDonald's is located isn't the best. There's a lot of druggies, alcoholics, and just overall idiots who cause trouble. I'm usually pretty good at fending for myself and shaking things off, but this encounter really freaked me out. So it was a couple of weeks ago and I was working on the drive-thru window where you collect your food. It's not uncommon for guys to make sexual comments or innuendos when they come through the drive-thru because they don't really have to face any consequences. However, this one guy came through the drive-thru and commented on my beautiful BJ lips, and he then asked me to meet him out back to put them to good use. I declined in the politest way I could manage and told him to move along as he was holding up the queue of cars. He then moved and I thought that was the end of that whole ordeal. 5 minutes later, the same dude comes around again and makes even more sexual comments about me, my hair, and all the creepy things he'd like to do to me. They were quite creepy and very disgusting. They were mostly about the things he'd do to me. I was shocked and quite visibly sickened, so he drove off and I told my manager that I felt uncomfortable by this customer, and I asked to be moved to a different station in case he came back around. Well, apparently he did, because the boy who switched stations with me also had an encounter with this guy. He was asked where I was, what my name is, if this guy would give him my phone number, and if he knew where I lived and what time I finished. The boy thankfully only told him my name and that I had moved on to the front counter, but that was before he realized this guy was a total freak and decided not to say anything more. Now, this is where the story gets really weird for me. The creepy guy came into the store and came up to the till that I was stationed on. He made similar remarks about what he wanted to do to me if he were to ever get his hands on me. He didn't stop until other customers interrupted him and told him to back off and walk away because I was getting really upset and shaken. He wouldn't leave, so I tried to walk away, which is when this guy tried to jump over the counter to try to get to my side of the store. Luckily, my managers and a few other staff members grabbed a hold of him and stopped him getting near me, but that didn't stop him from fighting back and still trying to touch me and get near me. At one point, he was even clawing at my coworkers with his long, nasty nails. Other members of staff alerted the staff safe, a sort of panic button that connects us right to the police, who are then sent right away. Fortunately, because I work in a very rough area, police patrol very closely to where I work, so they managed to get to the store pretty quick. They detained the guy and found a few knives stashed all over his body. army knives, pocket knives, and even just small regular kitchen knives. As they were dragging him away, he continued to scream about how he was going to wait outside the store for me every day and that we belonged together, and just screaming all of the rantings of a madman. My manager sent me home in a taxi, and I've never seen this guy, his car, or anything else of his ever again, which I thank my lucky stars for. Number 4. This happened about 18 months ago. I lived alone when I was 19, and one night I decided to walk down to McDonald's like I do on occasion. I lived about 1 kilometer from McDonald's. It was a bit of a sketchy area, a lot of people roaming the streets, and a lot of addicts and criminals. I started walking and saw 2 guys probably around my age on the other side of the street. In this situation, it's important to note that my house and McDonald's were on the same main street, opposite tree-dense campsites on the beach. I could feel their eyes as I walked past, but I didn't look up. They crossed the road and started walking behind me. They were close enough for me to hear them. Laughing and whistling. They waited at the corner as I went into McDonald's, and I could see them watching. I left McDonald's through the back door, walked straight up the side street, and around 3 blocks before I braved going back through the main road. I came out in front of them, and again, they started following me. They were steadily gaining on me. I walked as fast as I could without running because I knew they would catch up to me. I came to a corner with a 7-Eleven and turned in. As soon as I was out of their sight, I ran straight behind the store and hid between a dumpster and a bush. I just stayed there for around 20 to 25 minutes. I slowly emerged and went up to the next side street. I followed that street down until I came to a few more shops behind the main street. They were standing under a post light directly in my way. I then froze and walked backwards slowly and carefully, trying not to be seen or heard. Again, I ran around another side street and ended up looping around my house and jumping my back fence. After that, plus a couple of other similar experiences, I have serious anxiety about leaving the house by myself. I don't think I'm going to be doing that anymore. Number 5. This all literally just happened within the past hour. I got out of work at 6:30 p.m. and went to McDonald's to get an iced coffee. I pull up to the drive-thru and there's a red truck in front of me with a cap on the bed. It's super wide so I can't see their mirrors and thus can't get a glimpse of who is inside. I'm minding my own business listening to Unsolved Mysteries on YouTube when I see that the red truck has pulled up to the second pickup window. You know, there's the window where you pay and then the 2 separate windows where you pick up your food. I didn't think anything of it and just assumed they had a big order, and the McDonald's employee asked them to pull up so that I could get my iced coffee. I look up to see the truck's reverse lights come on. Okay, they must have pulled up a little too far and are backing up a little. They keep backing up without signaling to me that they're backing up. I slowly back up as well, and luckily no one's behind me. They keep backing up until they're finally parked at the first pickup window now. The McDonald's employee looks out the window at me, shrugs, and gives me a look like, I don't know why they did that. A few minutes go by. At this point, I'm just thinking about how strange it is and not part of common etiquette it was to back up without signaling to anyone you needed to do so. They could have easily hit me had I not been looking straight ahead, curious as to what they were doing. Now 5 minutes goes by. No one is being given any food. I just want my iced coffee, so I'm kind of annoyed that they backed up, thinking maybe they were told to go to the second window since I only needed the iced coffee. But they suddenly felt like refusing to do so would get McDonald's to get them their food faster, and thus they backed up to the first pickup window. I don't know. Anyways, I continue to sit there and wait for my food when I see the passenger door to the truck open. Out comes an older man who looks to be around 65 to 70 years old. He was wearing light khaki covered overalls and a dirty white t-shirt. He starts walking slowly over to my car. I'm thinking, maybe he's going to apologize to me for not signaling that they needed to back up. He gets to my passenger door window, turns so he's facing the window head on, and then just stares at me. I'm waiting for him to signal me to put my window down, thinking he had something to say. Well, he doesn't do anything. He just stands there and stares at me. He starts to lift his hand towards the door handle. I quickly lock the door. He scowls and walks back to the truck and gets back into the passenger side. They immediately drive away the second he closes his door. They didn't get any food. They didn't get anything. They just left. I pull up to the drive-thru to finally get my iced coffee, and it's been well over 10 minutes at this point, but I finally head home. At this point, I have more questions than answers now. Why did they back up without signaling? Why did they need to back up at all? And why did he get out of his truck? Why was he about to open my door? Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't they get their food or drinks? It might not be the creepiest thing to have happened, but this whole ordeal made me so anxious that I was shaking the whole ride home. I just wish I had some kind of insight or understanding to exactly what happened here. Definitely my most creepiest experience while at McDonald's, and I really hope I don't have another one. Number 6. This happened last month, but I totally forgot about it until I read the recent story about the old creep who backed his truck up in the drive-thru while the OP was waiting to get a coffee, then got out and made to get into her car. My story isn't anywhere near as creepy, but still pretty creepy to me. Anyway, my daughter and I went to the drive-thru for a late-night snack. As I was ordering, this guy ran out from the side of the building and jumped in front of my car. My little Yorkie Obi, who was sitting in my lap, didn't like that at all. Normally he likes everyone, but why would he be friendly to some strange guy who was taking exaggerated movie slasher stomps towards my car? I stopped ordering our food while Obi went nuts, and I was alternating staring at this guy while glancing around to see if I had a quick exit in case the guy made a run for my car. The guy kept stomping forward, but now he started barking in a deep threatening voice like a large dog and staring straight at Obi. I was afraid Obi was going to jump out the window to attack, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. Then I got pissed. He was scaring my daughter and me and freaking my dog out. I had a sudden crazy thought to just gun it and run this idiot down. "Move, you idiot! Your barking ass is standing between me and my quarter pounder." Of course, I never would have done that, but I almost reversed and drove off. Suddenly, he stopped barking and ran off the way he came. The whole thing only took about 30 seconds, but I was pretty shaken and jittery the whole drive home. My daughter thought it was funny, but not me. Maybe he meant it as a joke, but I certainly wasn't amused.
This happened around 2006 when I was 11 years old. My cousin Aaron was spending the week with my sister and I over summer vacation. At some point during the week, my mom decided to take us all to McDonald's. We ordered and took our food to the back of the McDonald's to sit at a table connected to one of those super long booths along the wall nearest to the bathrooms. Sitting on the same booth, but a few tables down, was an older man sitting by himself. He was probably in his 60s, a bit overweight, balding, and had huge lens 80s style glasses on. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt with gray sweatpants. When we first walked in, I noticed him, but he kept his head down and didn't seem to pay any attention to us, so I kind of blew him off and almost forgot that he was there. My mom had my brother in his car seat by the table and was feeding him french fries. He must have either choked or got sick because he started throwing up all over the place. My mom grabbed him and rushed into the bathroom with him, followed by my sister to help. Aaron and I were left alone at the table. All of a sudden, the old dude looks over at us and starts trying to have a conversation with us. It started with the casual, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And then he said something about hoping my brother was okay. So we politely responded, thinking that's all that he wanted to say. But then he immediately started getting weird. He asked our ages, which we told him. And then he started asking our names and where our moms worked. So, being kids, we told him that also. The man then looked down at his phone and said that our mom had just texted him saying they would be a while in the bathroom and that he was supposed to bring us home because it was getting late. Although I knew my mom had never even talked to this man once. So, even as a kid, I knew something was off. The man then grabbed our hands and said we should hurry. At this point, we were practically being dragged outside. We got outside, and this man started leading us into an old, run-down white van. He opened the back door and said that we could stay in there for the ride. Luckily, Just then, some younger guy had spotted us and instantly went over and told the manager what was going on. As this was happening, my mom and my sister also came out of the bathroom, saw what was going on, and screamed while running outside to us. At this point, we hadn't gotten in the van yet, but the man was trying to push us in. Now hearing my mom's screams, I instantly started pushing back, trying to keep myself from entering. The guy quickly gives up as the manager and my mother are fast approaching. The guy gets in the driver's seat and steps on it with his back door still open. My mom was still yelling at us, and we started crying. We didn't know what to think. To this day, this experience still horrifies me. I don't know why me and my cousin were stupid enough to go along with what this guy was saying, but I'm just glad my mom showed up when she did.